I think that's probably enough, unless, Alan, you think we should give it a minute, but otherwise I think we can get started. So then maybe if I start here and we can bring up the agenda, maybe there you just see it, what we plan for the day. And I think Alan and myself, we do a brief introduction, and I think I'll briefly go ahead before we get into the substance. So maybe what I wanted to say to welcome you, first of all, it is only Tax Certainty Day, but we all know that there's a lot of competent authorities working busily every day on making tax certainty a reality. And I think that is also something that we will be pointing out, I think, as we come to the map awards. I think I'm very pleased that we have so many of you here. Ideally, of course, in person, but it is easier to do digital, so we do it digital. But there is a question whether in the future we might still try to bring you back to Paris. We haven't given up on this, but for now, thanks a lot. Clearly, tax certainty gets you out of bed early, makes you stay up late. So it is a topic worth to discuss for all of us. I think it's also, as we often say, win-win topic. I think this is really a win-win topic when we think about tax certainty. We think about it from the tax administration perspective of being effective in allocation of resources to risk, on reducing resources and focusing on where the risk is higher, and certainly in the current economic environment in particular, but always it is, as we have done in a study and seen, a key part of stability, at the risk of sounding German here, at the important part of facilitating cross-border investment. It has much wider ramifications, and we shouldn't be thinking about this as sort of an exotic add-on. It's one of the core things, if we also go back to the mission of the OECD overall, that we're here seeking to achieve. And I think that's important to retain. And, as you know, the OECD's work has had a tax certainty pillar way before we had other pillars. And so it is a very important dimension of our work over the years, whether that's on the Model Convention, whether that's on APAs, whether that's now also on Action 14, on the work that we've done on arbitration. And I think it's also important to see this in this context. At the same time, we recognize that we have a global community that comes together in the inclusive framework, and people have different views and approaches to tax certainty, and we try to reflect the diversity in the work that we do. We have OECD and non-OECD countries also in the steering group. We're happy to have, for instance, South Africa in the steering group, in India, and many others in this big family that we have here. And we also recognize the divergences and the different views in the work that we do, for instance, in Pillar 1, where we have the possibility of electing in and electing out, effectively making binding resolution elective for small developing countries. So then I think let me focus briefly before I hand it over to you, Alan, just to give you a sense of what we have in mind today. I think, as you can see on the agenda, after Alan speaks, I'll have the pleasure of giving the floor again to myself. I like doing this. And then we get into the first session. And the first session here really is about the current environment. I will be releasing the MAP statistics for this year, i.e. last year, of course. And then I think Sandra will take you through this in more detail. And then I think the first panel will look at today's environment, where we are, what it looks like from the different perspectives, where we might go next, and making step-by-step incremental improvements that are so important to improve the situation that businesses face, the tax administrations face, with the idea of reducing disputes at the earliest point that we can take. So we will cover aspects of FPAs, we will cover ICAP, we will cover different aspects, and I'll go into this in more detail when we get to the first panel. Then we want to take you into Pillar 1. We recently completed a public consultation. In fact, it's the second public consultation on the tax certainty dimension of Pillar 1, where we want to talk about where this stands, what has come out of the public consultation, where we can take it, and also what it looks like from a business perspective, which is also why we have Karen on the panel. I think one of the things I do want to point out here, and that's the point about complexity often made about both pillars. And I think in part, and this is important to also see, I think the reason why we are now designing the rules and the administration on the same time is because that is a part response to complexity of the pillar. And I think it's very important and something that I think business and other stakeholders have often suggested. Don't design the rules and then start thinking about the administration. Design the rules together with the administration. And so I think we do need to look about the complexity and the operational challenges of the pillar in looking at the rules, but also looking at the tax certainty, where I think we've done some quite novel processes, taking out of our wider work of having upfront early certainty on the methodology, but also on the number. And I think that's a complete package that we need to look at and then appreciate as we think about the pillar. So we'll hear more on pillar one on item 3. And then we move into pillar 2, the tax certainty dimension in pillar 2. And there we're happy to have Felicie and Marco Juvinale and Daniel to give us their perspectives on the pillar 2 tax certainty dimension, which starts with clear rules, as you always said, start with the rules, because then you may not even have disputes to arise. Start with the systemic part of how they interact. Think about all those dimensions. Start with the same data fields, such as the global information return, and then think inside this context, what additional tax certainty dimension we may want to bring in. I'm looking forward to that discussion. And then finally, we will have the MAP Awards, as we have them, as a recognition of a lot of work that is being done in competent authorities to improve MAP, that are using new approaches to reduce. And I think we have some quite impressive results from a number of jurisdictions, and we're very, very pleased to be able to announce that. And we're equally very, very pleased that we've been able to get Bob Hamilton, the Commissioner of Canada Revenue Agency and the Chair of FDA, out of his busy day job and be with us to run and moderate the MAP Awards, as he's done also last year. So I'm very grateful to Bob that he's with us. And then finally, in the housekeeping arrangements, if through these panel sessions you do have any questions that you would like to ask to any one of the panelists, please put them in the chat and we'll try to monitor that. And then time permitting, we will get to those questions. So for me, a big welcome. Thank you very much for all your contribution. Thank you for the good cooperation inside the MAP Forum, but also more widely also in the interaction with BIAC. And I think without further ado, that's my segue into giving the floor to you, Alan.
Okay, thanks very much, Achim. I hope everyone can hear me. Thanks also to OECD for this invitation to join this Tax Certainty Day. As we said before, and as we say regularly, tax certainty is of the utmost importance for business, and we commend the OECD and all of the delegates for the substantial amount of work that goes on in this area. Very much looking forward to the variety of different discussions that are scheduled for the rest of today's session. Grace came to our business at OECD Tax Committee a couple of weeks ago, and we were all really encouraged to hear about the focus that continues to be placed on achieving greater tax certainty. And that's because tax certainty is important to business for many reasons. It's good also to see from the wide participation today that it's important to the OECD team and to delegates also. And it's important not only because I think it sends a clear signal of our common intent. It's also important because it creates this opportunity for us to share our experiences and to learn from others. And it's also important, finally, because it offers us an opportunity to celebrate the many innovations, the great progress and performance of those people who will win the awards. But as Achim pointed out, there'll be a whole bunch of people who won't win awards, but who do great work day in and day out, and who, for me, are our kind of everyday tax certainty champions, working on MAP, working on ICAP, working on APAs, and all of the other ways that tax authority staff and business people and staff of the OECD work to make tax certainty a reality. We all have challenges finding bandwidth to prioritize not just the really obvious and urgent priorities, but also to make sure that we continue to invest in the approaches and the systems that deliver on our longer term priorities of collaboration, of transparency, and the certainty that they provide. And I think ultimately in delivering what you were describing there, Hakim, as compliance by design. So for all of those reasons, I'm really pleased that we're able to make time today for these important discussions. We live in times of great uncertainty, great volatility, great change from the ongoing impact of the pandemic, geopolitical tensions, including the Russian war against Ukraine, and of course the risks which we're all currently seeing that are posed by inflation and the threat of recession in many different parts of the world. And all of this, of course, playing out against the background of digital transformation, energy system transformation that changes how we work and how we live. We know that uncertainty is a risk to investment, and we all recognize the importance of investment at the moment for the inclusive growth that we aspire to. Some of these macro uncertainties can't be avoided, so it is important that we all work together to eliminate any risks which we might see as being unnecessary risks. I think together we can reduce tax uncertainty, and that's a good thing because that's how we can play our part in not only reducing waste, not only ensuring that we prioritize resources to to those areas of greatest risk, but also how in our own way we can help to promote growth. We'll hear more on the later panels on where we are on map statistics, and I'm very keen to hear on that, as well as on how we're experiencing the various OECD, FTA instruments and practices for avoiding disputes in the first place, or when those fail on resolving those disputes. We in BIAC are particularly pleased to hear feedback on the second ICAP pilot, and also really pleased to hear that the OECD and the FTA plan to reap the rewards of that enormous investment that's been put into this by relaunching application for the next rounds in 2023. And I'm sure we can all work together to encourage broad participation from companies and of course from countries in those 2023 rounds. Turning now to pillar 1 and pillar 2, then I realize that tax certainty is probably pillar 0, according to Hakim. Again, very much looking forward to those sessions. I think they are an opportunity for us to reflect and to learn. And they allow us to build these strong and concrete tax certainty mechanisms into the pillars as we design them. I think this is a moment of great opportunity, but it's also our collective responsibility to make the most of that opportunity, and that requires creativity, much of which we've seen, requires collaboration, I think, between business and tax administrators and policymakers, but it also requires pragmatism and some degree of honesty as between ourselves. I think that's how we best deliver not only on compliance by design, but also on tax certainty by design. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alan. And that echoes many of the things I think that we also feel certainly here at the OECD Secretariat when we look about our Pillar 0. With that in mind, and recognizing that tax certainty isn't just for Christmas, but it's an everyday endeavor, and we will see the heroes of our tax certainty also in the awards that work away on this every day to try to improve it. Let's then go over to our first panel, where I will moderate, but I will also start briefly with just 2 slides to set the stage a bit and then walk you through who's on the panel and then give the floor to the panelists. So one, I think, and just recapping, this is a slide I think that you've seen before. If we could have a next slide that shows a bit how we conceptualize, and there might be different ways the tax certainty landscape, and it sets out a bit like what we will discuss here. We clearly have a focus on blue. I guess the color coding gives it away. You know, it's also the OECD colors, so that, you know, dispute prevention to the extent that we can, we think is a much more effective way than having to resolve disputes once they have arisen. But we also recognize that there will always be some disputes arise. And so we seek to try to minimize what gets in the map pipeline and then deal with it effectively. And my next slide will tell you a little bit about, not yet, but go back, My next slide will, future, tell you a little bit about, what we have done on the map with a high level on the map statistics, and then Sandra will take you through in more detail. But that's not the whole story. The map statistics are an important part of the story, but it's not the whole story. That's why we wanted to start here. We are doing work on APAs. We all recognize that there's a timing issue with the A in APA. We also know that there are challenges around dimensions on the bilateral and the multilateral, and we'll hear from the panel on this. I think we are still working on cooperative compliance, and I think here, particularly given that this is about international dispute resolution, if you wish, taking thoughts and concepts of cooperative compliance into the design of, for instance, ICAP. And I think we will hear both from Jennifer from the tax administration side, and then also from Dassault Systems, from Zachary from the businesses side on ICAP. And on ICAP, just to say this, if you are interested, and I hope you're interested, we are still putting, certainly in the Secretariat, the resources into ICAP. We are big believers on the conceptual idea and also the practical side of this. And so if you are interested, come talk to tax administrations early to make that possible. So we will be talking in a minute on ICAP. I think if you look on the audit side, we've done work on coordinated, on joint audits. That, I think, impacted in part by Corona, has not seen sort of the level of activity in the recent years, so there's probably less to report. But that has not dropped off the agenda, so that if you are considering an audit, I think, we're better off having a joint audit rather than two individually separate audits that then may result in a map. But ideally, I think we would want to be in the risk assessment stage, which takes us back to concepts such as ICAP and wider concepts, I think, on coordinated risk assessment. I think importantly, certainly how I view it is also that as you see who will be speaking at these different topics, you realize that we haven't created any silos here. And so that the same team members that work on ICAP power, if you wish, the Pillar 1 tax certainty dimensions. And so we're trying to take the practical learnings that we have in, if you wish, the first session that we focus on in today's environment, and take in some sense the best that we can think of practically and conceptually, and try to use that as we design the pillars, the future initiatives, so that the current experiences of what works and what we can do really power the future design. And that's also, as I said before, the recognition that we do need to think about the administration and rule designs at the same time simultaneously, so we come to administrable results. Then maybe that's all I wanted to say, and you will hear more about this. Maybe before we go, just one word also here on arbitration. I think that while the number of jurisdictions that have committed and implemented arbitration in their convention, we would think is probably still too small. I guess there would probably not be disagreement on this. They do cover, and that is interesting, a very substantial part of the current map inventory. So when we look at not the numbers of countries committed to arbitration, but when we look at what that represents in overall map inventory, it's a very significant number. Sandra has all the numbers, but you can approximate it, it's over 60%. So that's quite substantial. So then with this one, let me get to the one that we are here for today, and that brings us to this day. It's like the high level messages from the 2021 map statistics. So what you see is inventory is slightly up, time relatively stable compared to last year's. Outcomes, and Sandra will talk about this also in a moment, I think relatively similar to previous years. One thing I think that always gives us hope, we like good news stories here. That is very interesting. I think it's probably the most remarkable aspect of the statistics that we're releasing in today is that if you focus for a minute on transfer pricing, but overall we have a drop in new cases. I think it's a first of having an actual drop of new cases that are going into the inventory. And if you stay with transfer pricing for a minute, then you also see that we have a higher number of cases closed. So less transfer pricing cases going in, higher number of cases being closed. I think that is a 1-year data set. So we can't tell you whether that is a blip, if you wish, or if this is a trend. But I think for the first time here, and this is, I think, a takeaway at a high level, for the first time here, we are in striking distance of stabilizing the MAP inventory. Jonathan has calculated there's only a 4% delta here, so we're very close. So maybe now, I can't tell you that we're turning the ship, but certainly we have gotten ourselves into striking distance of stabilizing the inventory. We need to see whether the reduction in cases is a one-year event that may have been linked to Corona, or whether it's something more systemic. But certainly all the efforts of all the people listening in and all the competent authorities with reducing the inventory by solving more cases, and importantly, solving cases with outcomes eliminating double taxation. Solving them otherwise is much easier, but actually solving them is quite an achievement. So also you will see this in the MAP Awards later on. I think there is something that is interesting, that is very positive. We need to see that we're keeping it up. I guess not us here, but all those people working on MAP here, but being within striking distance of stabilizing the inventory and potentially then also reducing it shows that I think what we're doing here collectively is working. Again, we need to see whether that is 1 year or this is a trend. We can't yet say that it's the beginning of a trend, but we remain hopeful that with all the efforts on improving the MAP processes, on the peer review, on all the other things that we will be discussing, that maybe we're getting close to stabilizing and then potentially reducing those inventories, which is, I think, something that we all collectively strive for as we are here together on this tax certainty day. So that's, I think, a high level I wanted to give you. I think what happens now, and I will hand over the floor next to Sandra. You all know Sandra, the Queen of MAP. If you don't know and anything you don't know about MAP, Sandra will have the answer. She will take you through, I think, where we are in more detail, unpack the MAP stats for you. I think also give you a sense of where we are in Action 14, the review, and also from her perspective, what she sees in today's environment. We then hand over after Sandra to John Hughes. As you all know, he's the chair of the MAP Forum. We'll talk about the work of the MAP Forum, the products we have recently released, what we do on bilateral APAs, multilateral APAs, importantly, what we do on Amount B and how we try to stabilize the system, which is, also to be seen in the context of earlier FTA work. I've seen Doug O'Donnell here listening in. So, that fits into much earlier work that we've already done in the FTA and, of course, also in Working Party 6. And he will also perhaps give you a sense of what the environment looks like from the US's perspective and where he sits. Then happy that we have Jennifer Best with us, who will tell us about ICAP and what it looks like from her perspective. And then we also get a business view from Zachary, who's from Dassault Systems. And I'm very pleased that he can make it here and share his experiences. And then finally, we have Ahmed from HMRC that will take us through some of the work that we've been doing on APAs, but also give the perspective from HMRC. So I am certainly looking forward to this panel, and because that is the case, I hand it over to Sandra. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Achim. And yes, let me start by talking a little bit to you about the MAP statistics, the 21 statistics. Statistics are part of transparency. And I think it's important because we often hear that MAP is a black box and that you don't know a lot about it. And statistics may not solve that, but in the end, with the information that is provided, you get a lot of information on what's going on in the MAP world. And so I'm pleased to say that for the 21 statistics, we got up to 127 jurisdictions that provided statistics. I think that even with the 118 we had last year, we already covered practically all the MAP cases, but it shows that almost all IF jurisdictions that have treaties are now providing statistics and are part of this transparency. And I think that's the important part of this, that the jurisdictions are providing their numbers so that we know what it is. And especially for those that do not have cases and that perhaps did not provide statistics before, they are prepared now to do it. And so that if ever they get cases, they will be in the statistics as well. And so what you get if you go to the website, and I think in like half an hour you will see the statistics of 21 on the website, is the aggregated data across all jurisdictions that you will see each year. But not only that, you get also country-specific information. And so all the data you get on aggregate basis, you also get per jurisdiction. And that provides, I think, for a lot of transparency, because you can really see how a specific jurisdiction is doing, and you can compare that information to the aggregate data so that you can see, is that jurisdiction a little bit like everybody else, or are there differences? And there are some differences between jurisdictions. So you can really get a view on how a jurisdiction is doing in MAP by looking at that country-specific information. And then at the end, there's also this compare your country tool. And that is something that allows you, if you want to compare some data points from jurisdictions, instead of needing to go to all the specific country files, you can just go to that tool and see, for example, how much cases they have in inventory, or how much cases that started that year. So you get a lot of information if you want to compare jurisdictions. Now, the general slide, the first slide you will see on our website with how things are going. Please don't forget that the green part of the slide provides the old statistics where we still have double counting. It's only in the purple part where we do not have the double counting anymore. So the numbers are not exactly correct numbers, but you can be assured that if you look at that inventory, there's a lot of cases in the MAP inventory, even if we take out the little bit of double counting from that. Now, if there's one thing that I really want to tell you about this slide, that is that you see that there are still old cases in inventory. And what do I mean with old cases? It's cases that started before 2016. So that means that there are cases older than 6 years still in inventory. Now, it's good to see that they decreased by 25%, which is good, but it means that there are a lot of cases left in inventory that would really need closure. Although I also need to nuance, there may be many cases in that old inventory where MAP is just pending because the taxpayer decided to pursue actively before court, and that's why MAP is pending, and so they're just waiting for the outcome of the court case to continue with MAP. So it's not that all cases take so long. So that's a little bit of a nuance to give. But you see, and Achim was able to tell you that we are at least getting a little bit to bridging the gap between the cases started and the cases closed, but it is necessary, because if you look at the total inventory, there's a lot of cases in inventory. Now, you can see here the overview from 2016 to 2021 with a lot of cases. Now here, I need to tell you, the numbers look completely different from the one on the previous slide, because here there is complete double counting, because without the double counting, we can't show you the trend. And like Achim said, you see that if we look at the end inventory for the transfer pricing cases, I think it's the first time that it's almost at the same level as the start inventory. So that is, I would say, some good news. You also see that the other cases, the inventory is getting up. So a lot of cases to deal with. If we then quickly go to the next slide, if we see the cases closed, you can see here, and that is something, and Achim already said it, really important. Competent authorities are working very, very hard to close many, many cases, and they have done year after year after year a great job in doing so. And year after year, they are closing more cases. And in 21, they did like this extremely good job in closing even more cases than the year before. So I think it shows the willingness of competent authorities to work hard on MAP. The only thing it also shows, if we look at the cases initiated, is that we need prevention as much as possible because the less cases get into the map line, the better it will be and the more easy it will be for competent authorities to deal with the raising number of cases and to get this inventory being stable. If we look at where MAP is situated, then it is something that is rather concentrated. If we take at the overall concentration, the top 5 of the countries are good for 43% of all MAP cases. So 43% of all MAP cases within the top 5 countries. And if we take the top 10, we're already at about 70%. So there's really a big concentration of MAP cases. And if we have the top 25, we cover more than 90% of all MAP cases. So there's more and more jurisdictions that will get like 1 or 2 MAP cases, but in general, most of the cases are already combined together. Now, there's one thing I want to show, because we should not forget, we often speak about transfer pricing, and of course, it's really relevant because half of the cases are transfer pricing cases, but there's also like almost half of the cases being non-transfer pricing cases. And for some jurisdictions, and you can see it here, there's like a lot of other cases that started. And for some jurisdictions, even a lot more other cases than transfer pricing cases. I think this has to do with the specific situation of these countries having like a lot of people working in the neighbor countries, a lot of cross-border activity. But that is something to keep in mind, that competent authorities can't just focus on transfer pricing, but if you look at some of the big countries here, they also need to focus on the other cases. Now, if we look at the time it takes to close MAP cases, for transfer pricing cases, it's a little bit less than last year. For other cases, it's a little bit more than last year. Other cases still within 24 months, transfer pricing cases above 24 months. But I think the important message is that even when they are above 24 months, the transfer pricing cases, this is an average. And it also shows that not only the new cases are being dealt with, but that also old cases are being resolved. And I think that is important because you could manipulate this average time by only dealing with your new cases, but that's not a good result. So it's double. I mean, we would like to see this average going down, but at the same time, we always want to see the old cases being closed as well. So that is why I think better to have a little bit a higher average, but all kinds of cases, also old cases being closed and not only the new cases. Then, as promised by Achim, a little bit more on the outcomes. And so you see it here for transfer pricing cases and other cases. The big message to give is that about 75% gives like full closure to the taxpayer, whether it is via fully eliminating double taxation or taxation not in accordance, or via unilateral relief, or sometimes when court MAP was pending and suspended because the court case was pursued, that court resolved the issue for the taxpayer. So we have about 75% being resolved like that. But I need to stress, and I've done this before, so you probably heard me saying it before, but it's not that the other 25% are bad outcomes. What is bad is the dark red you see here being the 2% no agreement, including agreement to disagree. That is not good. This is what we would like to see as 0% in an ideal world. But all the other things are not necessarily bad outcomes. And if you look, for example, with the other cases, like 7% access denied and 7% objection not justified, if you compare to the transfer pricing cases, you see that these percentages are a lot lower. Probably because in transfer pricing cases, taxpayers are being represented by tax professionals who know the rules, who know when to file, where to file, who provide the necessary information and documentation, which is not necessarily the case for individuals, which in my view, accounts for the higher percentages of access denied or objection unjustified. And just to assure you all, even when access is denied, this is not necessarily a bad outcome, because it may be the correct outcome. Because if you are too late, you are too late. And then unfortunately, you are no longer entitled to MAP. And if there would be instances where access to MAP is denied where it should have been granted, I can also tell you that we deal with it within the peer review, so that we we talk about that regularly. If you look at the peer review reports, you will see that we have made several recommendations for jurisdictions that did not provide access in specific circumstances where access should have been granted. So just to give you an idea that seeing here these percentages does not mean that competent authorities did something wrong. And then just to end, to show you a little bit what you can see if you go to the country-specific files, you have like the graph you saw on aggregated basis, you have it for the specific jurisdiction. And of course, if you look at it from a specific jurisdiction, there's no double counting. You have the numbers going with it so that you see how many cases a jurisdiction has. Old cases, new cases, the outcomes of a jurisdiction. And as I said, if you go to these pages, you will see that some jurisdictions are like doing about the same as we have in the aggregate data, but here you already see that sometimes there's like differences, and you have also some information on who are the biggest MAP partners of that jurisdiction. And then the compare your country tool gives you, for example, you can go and look at start inventory or cases started, and you can go on each of them and have them from 0 to 1 or from top to bottom. And so you can quickly see who is the top 5 in getting new cases, who is the top 5 when you started the year, who is the top 5 in cases in end inventory. You can get a lot of information just by going to that site and without you needing to go to all the specific cases. So I think that is a little bit our MAP statistics for 21. John is going to talk about what the MAP Forum has done. If I'm allowed to say a few words on BEPS Action 14, and John is going to talk about it more, but we have worked very hard in the past years with all the MAP Forum members in finalizing all the peer reviews and doing all the reports, in discussing within the MAP Forum what we think is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what does the minimum standard say, do we think that we have tackled everything in the minimum standard, or do we see that we still have problems, and should we consider like changing the minimum standard? That work is on hold for now because we are concentrating on the tax certainty for the pillars, but we will take that work up. But we have done a lot of work in the MAP Forum, and I think if I go and talk somewhere and I ask, did BEPS Action 14 make a difference? I think it did. I think the fact that we see so many competent authorities dealing with so much cases, I think thanks to BEPS Action 14 with an average of 24 months and the adequate resources for competent authorities allowed competent authorities to get more resources, which allowed them to deal with all these cases. So I think that BEPS Action 14 is part of the solution and the progress we are making in MAP, which is seen here in the MAP statistics. I mean, I could tell a lot more, but as John is going to talk about what the MAP Forum has done, I think I will leave it here and give the floor back to Achim.
Thanks a lot, Sandra. Yes, I think given the time, I think we can have this panel and can it last for the whole day. But without further ado, over to you, John, and very good to see you.
Very good, Malcolm. Nice to see you and all in the audience. And let me wish you a happy Tax Certainty Day. It's a pleasure to be able to follow my good friend and colleague Sandra, the Queen of Map. I think that's a good moniker for her. So indeed, let me give you a review of what we in the MAP Forum did in 2022. And I think as with 2020 and 2021, I think there are two words that really sum up this past year for the MAP Forum: continuity and delivery. So within the MAP Forum, we continued to make progress, substantial progress in many cases on a variety of our work programs. And then we also delivered or made good on some key deliverables that had been mandated for us within the MAP Forum. So importantly, we met on a regular basis in 2022. And just as in 2020 and in 2021, pardon me, attendance and participation in all the meetings was very high. Upwards of at least 130 delegates attended each of our meetings. Indeed, our most recent meeting in November, earlier this month, was both virtual and in person. And around the table, there were at least some 50 different jurisdictions that were represented. And I will just say on a personal note, just how delightful it was to see so many colleagues that I have not seen in person in the past few years, and to see so many people catching up. It was just a reminder of how important that personal connection is to the foundations of a very good competent authority relationships. This kind of goodwill and collaboration made possible indeed the various successes that we had in 2022. A very notable achievement that we reached in June of 2022 was the completion of the Stage 2 peer review program under BEPS Action 14. The MAP Forum, as you know, and as you've heard, has been administering Action 14 for the past 6 years. And over that time, each of our members of the MAP Forum has been reviewed twice as part of a two-stage process. Indeed, even those countries with little or no MAP experience were considered and reviewed by the MAP Forum. But in June, we finalized it and approved the last of the Stage 2 reports, bringing the total number of reports that we reviewed to 164, covering a total of 82 jurisdictions. Setting aside the volume of work that this represents, I do agree with Sandra that what is perhaps most important is that this stage or this peer review program established by Action 14 really did benefit all the competent authorities involved. We all benefited from the comprehensive review and the very constructive feedback that we all received from our peers as part of this review program. During 2022, we also continued work, which we initially began in 2020, reviewing the Action 14 minimum standard itself, as Sandra mentioned a moment ago. So this year, we focused on certain enhancements and improvements to the methodology that we will follow for conducting peer reviews going forward, the so-called assessment methodology. We also, though, reviewed enhancements and improvements to the statistics that we collect and to the procedures that we will follow in collecting those statistics. Pending final approval by the IF, these enhancements and improvements will help us administer Action 14 more efficiently going forward, while still ensuring that both our delegates as well as the many stakeholders interested in the statistics and in the peer reviews. So importantly, our stakeholders and partners within the FTA and within the taxpayer, tax practitioner, and academic communities, that all stakeholders will continue to receive very robust data and information about competent authority inventories and practices. During 2022, we also kept our attention on various projects that are not strictly related to Action 14, but indeed projects that will, in a sense, kind of complement Action 14 in improving the dispute prevention and resolution landscape. As I'm sure so many of you know, in September of 2022, the MAP Forum released its bilateral APA manual, or BAPM. I still have a difficult time with that acronym, but all right, we'll go with BAPM. But that was released in September. My colleague Ahmed will soon be talking about that in greater detail. But if I may, for my part, I think I'm very pleased to see how well received the BAPM has been, especially given all the work that went into it from so many members of the MAP Forum, and my thanks to all of them. What you may not be aware of, but though it was mentioned just a moment ago, is the work that the MAP Forum has done in the multilateral MAP and APA space. The product of that work is a forthcoming, if you will, companion manual to the BAPM. In our September meeting, we finalized and approved a manual that will indeed provide information on best practices and some recommendations for effective handling of multilateral MAP and APA cases, which, as we all know, can be very challenging and very difficult, both legally and then practically speaking as well. I'm very pleased to say that with this manual on multilateral MAP and APA, the MAP Forum has then made good on a mandate set forth to us by the FTA in the Santiago communique going back to 2020. And as Aka mentioned, this has been a work stream long in process, so it's nice to be able to have delivered on that. And indeed, speaking of the communique, also, once again, as Occam had set up here, the MAP Forum continued its work this past year toward streamlining and simplifying the application of the OECD transfer pricing guidelines in certain types of very common types of case. Specifically, this year, we partnered once again with Working Party 6 in the ongoing work on Amount B under Pillar 1. And I'm sure, as you know, a paper will shortly be coming out for public consultation regarding that work. And, together with Working Party 6, we in the MAP Forum look forward to receiving comments from the public on that work, and then look forward to continuing our work with Working Party 6 as we go into 2023. And indeed, in this coming year, we have various work streams that we're also going to be taking up, some of which have been idle the past year or so. One such work stream, and a very important one, is the continuation of MAP training workshops. These will be led by the Queen of MAP, so Sandra and her team and the Tax Certainty Secretariat, and they will be joined by a diverse range of competent authority representatives. These workshops are truly invaluable. They are good for disseminating best practices, and indeed for establishing and strengthening those relationships amongst competent authorities that, as I say, are vital and key to success. Another work stream that we'll be taking up in the MAP Forum in 2023 is an exploration of APA-like agreements for areas outside of transfer pricing. The thought is that this may extend the advantages of tax certainty and the prevention of disputes then for the benefit of taxpayers and tax administrations, as I say, in areas that are not conventionally covered by APAs and that often do not receive the benefits of prospective or advanced tax certainty. Similarly, in 2023, the MAP Forum will be continuing to explore partnerships with our friends across the FTA communities, and in order to consider innovative ways, right, to extend and broaden the tax certainty agenda. And indeed, as has been noted, a very prominent example of this kind of innovation is ICAP, and my colleague Jennifer Bess will be taking that up momentarily. So in closing, if I may just say on a personal note, it is indeed a very profound honor and privilege to thank the many members of the MAP Forum for their dedication to the resolution of MAP and APA cases this past year. As we've seen in the statistics, it was a very successful year, and that's a testament to the commitment and to the hard work of competent authorities around the world. And also, I want to thank them for their enthusiasm for the work of the MAP Forum, even outside of their day jobs. And once again, I want to thank Sandra and her team, Sriram, Jonathan, and the others on the team. We would not be able to achieve all the things that we did within the MAP Forum this past year without all the preparation they had done, the support they provided, and thus, indeed, the foundations that they have laid for success in 2023. So thank you to the team. And with that, Akam, I will turn it back to you.
Thanks a lot, John. And of course, speaking on behalf of the team, and I think also the delegates, let's also thank the chair. You do have a day job. I think I understand you have several day jobs, in fact. So, it's much appreciated. So eventually you will all get to sleep. I just don't know when that is. So with that, let me hand it over. We're switching gears slightly. I hand it over to Jennifer, who I think will focus on ICAP, but also add anything else she sees from where she sits as she looks out into the tax certainty landscape. Thank you for being with us, Jennifer. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Akam. I am very happy to be here to participate today because the U.S. and the IRS team, we are very committed to the work and the goals of the tax certainty agenda. And to this end, we have been actively supporting the ICAP program since its inception. ICAP was and still is innovative in a couple of ways when compared to some of the other tax certainty tools, in that it is multilateral by design, and it requires a change in the mindset from that all of us as tax administrators bring to our regular competent authority work in negotiating MAP cases. And I think the other very innovative aspect is that it employs risk assessment as a treatment stream. And that's been a new experience for all of us involved in the ICAP work, and we're all learning that together. In light of the global tax landscape, including everything we just heard about the map inventories from Sandra, and the things we're going to hear about coming up about the pillar work, you know, it's our view that we have no choice as tax administrators but to be innovative and forward-thinking about how to manage the tax risks that are presented relative to the resources necessary and available to provide tax certainty for both business and for ourselves. So I just wanted to pick up on a couple of those themes that Occam and Alan have already raised, to say that we agree and we fully support the efforts of this work. Turning to ICAP specifically, many of you are probably aware that we completed 2 ICAP pilots, and ICAP is now a permanent program. There is a wealth of information posted on the OECD's FTA website page, and including the handbook, a set of FAQs, and some information about the different tax administrations who participate in ICAP. Our group has grown to 22 jurisdictions. That is very exciting. We are represented in North and South America, Europe, and Asia, but we'd like to grow more. So for all of you from other tax administrations out there, we would love to talk to you and have you join our group. As Occam said earlier, the Secretariat is available for discussions about ICAP, but many of us participating tax administrations as well. My door is always open to talk to other tax administrations who are considering ICAP. I guess what I would like to focus on today is that I really truly believe that ICAP offers benefits to both tax administrations and to business. And I believe that this message has come through in both of the pilots and through all of the feedback that we've received from the participating M&Es. But Zachary will be speaking firsthand after me from the M&E perspective. So a couple of advantages. First of all, ICAP offers a lower cost option for tax certainty for both tax administrations and M&Es. And by lower cost, I'm comparing to some of the other tax certainty tools that we already have out there, meaning map work, APAs, or joint audits. Depending on the case, ICAP tends to be a lower cost option. But we recognize that ICAP may not be suitable for every business and every operation. So a couple of words on that. ICAP has proven to be a good forum for M&Es with similar transactions across multiple jurisdictions. For example, M&Es with global distribution business models where the same product lines or services are sold or offered in many countries based on a global transfer pricing policy. But that being said, ICAP has also proven to be workable with some very complex M&E businesses and structures. We've had a wide range of companies come in from different industries with very different operations and very different challenges. Over the course of about a year, multiple tax administrations risk assess multiple transactions that an M&E has. And if all of the tax administrations agree that transactions are low risk, the taxpayer could achieve an acceptable degree of certainty from multiple tax administrations on multiple transactions. But in order to achieve this goal, as I said earlier, ICAP involves a different mindset and a different approach than what we as tax administrators normally bring to our audits and to our competent authority negotiations. And the key to this mindset is transparency and cooperation by everybody involved, but all of the tax administrators as well as the companies participating. Unlike an audit, in ICAP, tax administrations are looking for transactions and issues that are low risk, so we can deselect them from our audit work streams and be more resource efficient in how we address risk and compliance risk. And unlike MAPs or APAs, where some or all of the years are no longer prospective, tax administrations are discussing risk, not negotiating specific amounts of tax dollars at stake. In the US, some practitioners have raised or pointed out that risk profiles seem to be inversely correlated. In other words, the country with the outsized profits will likely find something to be low risk, but a country with losses or thin margins are likely to say this is high risk or not low risk. And that certainly does happen in MAP, where tax administrations have already taken a formal position on an issue in the form of a tax adjustment. But in ICAP, it's a little bit different because the tax administrations have not yet taken a formal position. And they're considering the position in real time with other tax administrations who may be on the other sides of those transactions, as well as with the company and talking about the business. So it is very much a different mindset, which I think lends an interesting opportunity to both tax administrations and to businesses alike. At the end of the process, the M&Es get a letter from each participating tax administration, and it's this letter that provides certainty. It is important to clarify, many of you may know this, but just to underscore that ICAP does not lead to legal certainty, which is in contrast with audits and APAs. I think that was on the slide that Akam showed at the beginning, de facto certainty. But the level of certainty provided is commensurate with the investment of time and resources into an ICAP risk assessment engagement. And the ICAP outcome letter and determination still represents a lot of work and time and thinking put in by tax administration, the participating tax administrations on the issues that were reviewed. The outcome letters indicate whether each tax administration found the transactions impacting its jurisdiction or the M&E as a whole to be low risk or not low risk. And I know there's still some uncertainty about what does this mean? And in ICAP, all of us as tax administrators have defined low risk to mean that we do not intend to dedicate or apply any further compliance resources to the transaction or issue for which we assigned the low risk. But just because something is found to be not low risk is not found to be low risk, so it would be indicated as not low risk in an outcome letter, doesn't necessarily mean we found it to be high risk either. What it often indicates is that the tax administration could not reach a determination without further or deeper inquiry that is akin to an audit procedure. But because this is a risk assessment engagement, sometimes we do need to draw the line at going further. So please keep that in mind, that not low risk does not necessarily equal high risk. It's a little bit of a tongue twister there. And next, I wanted to share that ICAP provides an opportunity for the participating tax authorities to engage with one another before we have taken a formal position. I know I said that before earlier, but I just can't underscore the importance, because I think we've all experienced that once we've taken a formal position, it can be difficult to back away from that position if the issue comes to MAP. So the collective experience in ICAP is that the engagement has allowed us to talk to each other before we take the positions and have a very robust dialogue before we make a firm decision based on all the information that the M&E is providing through the ICAP process, but also hearing the perspectives of our colleagues in the other tax administrations. And this has challenged us on the US team. Sometimes we might be thinking about risk one way, but one of our partners might challenge us by sharing how they're thinking about risk on that very same transaction. So it really is a real-time engagement that affects the thinking about a risk and can save us all on making some formal adjustments. One last advantage I wanted to call out for ICAP is that depending on the applicable laws of the jurisdiction, we've also been able to resolve some issues in ICAP informally without the needs for audits or APAs or MAP cases. But even if we can't resolve issues in ICAP, and that has happened too, because some of our participating tax administrations have limitations in their domestic law or practice that would prohibit them from doing so. But even where we can't, we believe it leads to a more efficient post-ICAP dispute resolution, as the scope of the issues that need further review is narrowed, and the learnings of ICAP may be leveraged in those in the next work stream, whatever that may be, including the views and the understandings that we have from ICAP about the counterparties thinking of the issue. So considering all these benefits, I would encourage any tax administrations that are not presently participating to consider it. And I would also encourage other M&Es looking for tax certainty to consider ICAP along with the other tax certainty tools when you are deciding what is best for your business and your goals in managing your tax risk. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Akam.
Thanks so much, and thanks for everything you have done throughout this process. That took a lot of resources also, we know, but it's for a worthy cause, and you've just heard it from Jennifer. There's nobody who can probably describe that better. Other than perhaps, I guess, we're turning it over to business side, right? And see what it looks like when you're sitting on the other side. I don't want to actually say the other side, because one of the things I think ICAP does is like there's not one side on the other side. I think, as Jennifer has explained, like we're trying to get it early, we're trying to work together. It isn't a black box. And so it integrates this sort of collaborative working to reduce disputes before they arise. And so I hand it over to you, Zachary, to give us your sense from the perspective of a company that has gone through the ICAP process. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Akim and Jennifer. Thank you for giving me the possibility to talk today and to provide my feedback. The first question that maybe the M&A can have is, why going to ICAP if there is no legal certainty? This is an important question, and by going there, we're not looking for the legal certainty, but looking for something else, and to have the opportunity to have several tax authorities at the same table talking about our transfer pricing. Due to our organization, we spend a lot of time during tax audits explaining our TP methodology, providing details of calculation, and we thought it was an opportunity for us to put everything on the table and to show that our transfer pricing methodology and calculation to different tax authorities. We were looking for sure for a global insurance and comfort, and to have not only a validation of one tax authorities, but of several tax authorities. As Jennifer mentioned, it's a challenge and it's a change in mind. Okay, here you have to be totally transparent. You cannot hide anything. You have to show all the transaction for all the country that under scrutiny during the ICAP process. We were also interested in developing and secure good relationship with the tax authorities in order to avoid repetitive tax audits in these different countries. And we like the idea to have tax authorities discussing on our transaction. So all these points make us convince us to go for entering into the ICAP program back in 2019, just before COVID, which was also another challenge because it was increasing the time that we have spent on it, reduce the physical meetings. It was only online meetings, but at the end, it's a good outcome. Let's talk a little bit about our experience in the program. So first, the feedback. For us, it was a very good experience. We show a complete transparency with all the tax authorities. We have 7 tax authorities participating to our ICAP. I will give you just some figures to figure out what we are talking about. Dassault Systèmes is a software company making a 3.5 billion euro revenue in 2018. The year under the ICAP, covered by the ICAP, was 17 and 18. And for some countries, we get also a rolling forward of 2 additional years for 19 and 20. So over the period, 5 billion of interco transactions were reviewed by the tax authorities, covering around 85% of our intercompany transactions. We answered to 22 questionnaires to the tax authorities. We have more than 30 hours of meeting with tax inspector. We share more than 500 documents representing 4,000 pages. And we submitted 14 legal entities for which we provided 28 local files, 2 master files, 12 benchmark studies, and so on. And of course, a large number of deep segmented P&L to demonstrate the calculation and for the tax authorities to first validate the methodology, but also the calculation and the way we are calculating our transfer pricing. In terms of transaction covered, we were showing the distribution, everything related to R&D, so R&D lab, when you act as a subcontractor, everything related to share service center, management fees, and on the financial side, the loan and the cash pool. The second aspect was the relationship with the tax authorities. We have an excellent relationship with the French tax authorities, which is our, I would say, referent and leading tax authorities in the ICAP because we are a French company. So thanks to the team of Guillaume Ressouche, we have very strong and confident relationship for which we are engaging and a good communication. We also appreciate the professionalism of the tax authorities and the good quality of exchanges. It was very important. And also the fact that the tax authorities are talking each other was important for us because we knew that the transaction were discussed, the potential point raised by one tax authorities were discussed with all the others. And the last point is we found also interesting that after the ICAP process, we continue some discussion with tax authorities on very specific points that they would like us to review or to provide some inputs or advice for the future, so way of improvement. And this is something that we also appreciate. So now the benefit for Dassault Systèmes. So we spent some time on it, to be honest. Over the period, it was equivalent of one full-time employee. But the saving, because you have to put in front of that savings, the saving is during a normal tax audit, we have to spend half FTE on each tax audit. So considering the 7 countries, you see clearly the saving on this one, plus the saving of all the tax advisors that you need on some countries for a language reason or for technical reason, plus all the effort and time spent on potential tax assessment or any map. Because if you go to the map, if I follow what has been told previously, you need at least 32 months as an average to get a map resolution. So here we are saving time, we are saving people, time of the people, and money, which is very, very important. One of the engagement of the tax authorities, even it's not a legal certainty, if they give you a low risk assessment on the transaction, normally you have no, I will say, tax audit on this transaction. And to be fully transparent, it has been totally respected by the tax authorities and the country where we had tax audit, because we continue to have tax audit. There is not only transfer pricing during a tax audit, it's a part of it. And when we start the tax audit, we are showing the outcome letter that Jennifer was mentioning. And in those countries, we had no further investigation or question on the transfer pricing transaction that has been validated through the ICAP. So this is also a very positive point. So now maybe for the M&E, we would like to enter an ICAP, the interest for them. I will give you maybe some recommendation or point to keep in mind. Is first to review deeply the transfer pricing policies to determine the scope and the countries you would like to put for the request to enter into the ICAP program. I think that ICAP is more for large group with at least a transfer pricing team. If you don't have a transfer pricing team, maybe to have a strong people, we can dedicate time and to have good or direct access to the data. Because you need to be able to provide the data that will be requested. And if you engage with different tax authorities in different countries, you need to get the data from the different countries very quickly and from a consistent manner from one country to the others. So that means that you need to be ready in advance and to prepare for any documentation and to be ready also to have a sharp and technical discussion on your transfer pricing during this ICAP program. And for sure, the outcome of it is clearly to save time and cost for the future audits and go for advisor. And maybe just before to conclude, would like to make two proposals. The first one is maybe to support the M&E that would like to enter into ICAP is to create a point of contact from companies we already have done the ICAP program plus tax authorities without providing confidential information, but also to guide them and to provide some feedback on our own experience and potential advice on what could be or what could not be view, and should be a group, a mix between M&E for sure and tax authorities. The second one is maybe to look forward and what's after ICAP. Can we introduce a recurrence or a second part of the program? That's something that, as the system, we could be very interesting in. Is to, okay, maybe the ICAP is covering 4 years. What's happened after the 4 years? Can you redo a new ICAP? Either some lighter review of the transfer pricing if nothing changed, and then you have an additional roll forward. Something we'd like to discuss and to also contemplate with all of you to see the future of the ICAP program. So to conclude, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to participate in the pilot 2. It was a great experience and journey. And I really hope this testimony provide interest and demonstrate the benefits for the M&E to enter into the ICAP program. And for Dassault System, we'll be more than happy to redo it and to enter an extensive an extension of the program. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much for being with us, and thanks very much. I think it's very interesting to see it also how you've experienced, you've gone through what you've seen, including we'll take away your suggestions for improvements as we think about the future, what happens after you've gone through. I think very, very rich, very, very clear. Thanks a lot. I think we're now moving from ICAP, and again, if you are interested in ICAP, start speaking to your tax administration about the possibilities of joining. Do it early. I think engage with them. I mean, I guess as Jennifer has said, and that's also true for all of the other countries in tax administration that are participating, they are very happy to take you in, to walk you through with your questions. And of course, you know, we in the Secretariat, to the extent we can, we're more than happy to do this as well. Now, let me move then to our last speaker, Amit here. I can see him next to me, I think, who will take us through where we are on APA, where we should be, where we might go, and also gives his perspective on the tax certainty landscape from where he sits. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And just to say, it's great to be speaking at Tax Certainty Day. I'd probably say this is my second most important day each year between my wedding anniversary and my birthday, but I won't say which of those is first and third. I'll leave that to the audience to decide. So I want to just say a bit around the MAP Forum generally. I think its role and its support in providing this tax certainty agenda has been of increasing importance each year. At least from the UK side, we've seen annual increases in the number of MAPs and APAs each year. So John spoke a bit about MAPs, and that leaves me to talk about APAs, and in particular the accomplishment of the MAP Forum this year in releasing that bilateral APA manual, or BAPAM. There's been a heavy focus in previous years around dispute resolution, but just as important is dispute prevention. These two things being two sides of the same coin in the goal of eliminating double taxation. So what is a bilateral APA? Now, I'm assuming if you're watching this, you probably have an idea, but just in case there are people in the audience that might be less familiar, a bilateral APA is an agreement between two jurisdictions, normally made by the CAs of those jurisdictions, in advance of a controlled transaction by a taxpayer. And the CAs would agree an appropriate methodology for determining the transfer pricing for that transaction over a fixed period. So APAs are a useful tool for both taxpayers and tax administrations. I don't think there's any question about that. However, from our perspective, they're not something that's entered into lightly, and at least in the UK's perspective, they're targeted at your more complex transactions, or those transactions that are likely to be at risk of double taxation because of an audit. So with that background in mind, how did we get here with the release of the BAPAM? So as John mentioned earlier, back in 2019, 2020, we had representatives from 46 tax administrations meeting in Santiago to discuss, amongst other things, tax certainty. And as part of that meeting, the MAP Forum was tasked with identifying improvements that could be made to the APA process. Now, while APAs are a very useful tool in providing that tax certainty and provide a good use of resources for tax administrations, and we in the UK recognise that, its incredible value, it does have its logistical challenges. It requires good collaboration across a number of parties. So while it's for the CAs to ultimately agree the pricing of the transactions, taxpayers are an integral part of the process and are a key stakeholder to that process, because in essence, they're the keepers of the information around the controlled transaction. Now, as we noted earlier in this session, one of the biggest criticisms of APAs is how long they can take to conclude. And I've seen I've had experiences of APAs being concluded years after the covered period had ended, which isn't a great position to be in. So, well, what did the MAP Forum do with their task? Well, instead of simply dropping the advance in APAs and saying, job done, let's go home, we don't need to do any more, the MAP Forum looked at the entire process from start to finish, asking both tax administrations and businesses of their experience of APAs. It also asked what challenges they had in areas that they see as needing improvement. Now, a number of themes came out of those responses. The length of time to conclude APAs, as I mentioned before, is often longer than the covered period. The differences in the BAPA process between jurisdictions can lead to complications. The significant resources required as part of the APA process, and challenges in communication. So, as a result of the work done by the MAP Forum in those key areas, the BAPAM was released earlier this year, and I see this document as being useful to both tax administrations and taxpayers. It's the culmination of substantial amounts of work by the MAP Forum, and it has resulted in a document which I personally see as probably becoming fundamental to APA programs in the future. While that manual doesn't modify, restrict, or expand any rights and obligations under the treaties, within it we have 29 best practices which are targeted at both tax administrations and taxpayers. We also have a number of useful templates for position papers and mutual agreements, and I'll be upfront here and say I'll probably be adopting a lot of those templates. And we also have a lot of useful discussions on the different approaches being taken by different jurisdictions towards APAs. So I'll take this opportunity just to touch on a few best practices which stood out to me. So I think best practice one, the importance of it cannot be overstated. Broadly, CAs and taxpayers should be engaged in a principled, fair and transparent manner, and not swayed by achieving revenues or tax savings. So in our experience in the UK CA team, we have seen situations where the methodology proposed in the application has been created with one jurisdiction in mind, and it leaves the CAs in this challenging position of trying to bring the methodology to a more principled and equitable place. And this can often be increase the time it takes to actually conclude that APA. So another best practice 5, provides a useful target of 30 months for CAs to aspire to conclude their APAs. Now, in the UK CA team, I know we've started to more actively look at our current APA inventory that we have open, and with particular focus on those long-running APAs and trying to understand the reason behind their delays and whether we can be doing anything to help expedite their resolution. And I think this increased focus by senior members of our team on those most challenging cases has helped push them towards a resolution that wouldn't have happened as quickly had they just been left drifting slightly. So I think best practice 5 does provide a lot of good guidance to competent authority functions. Now, communication and managing expectations is a key theme that comes throughout these best practices. Best practice 8 and 9 encourage CAs to be in regular contact with taxpayers and other CAs. And this communication aspect is something that, again, I mean, we in the CA team recognise as being an area that we can always improve on to help make sure that the APA process seems a little less like that black box that Sandra mentioned, or void. And it may be as simple as just providing a status update in the absence of any material changes to the case, and it would provide taxpayers with that assurance that the case hasn't been forgotten, is still being actively worked. So little things like that will help enhance the APA programs throughout the world. However, on that point, it's equally important that we manage taxpayers' expectations, and that ultimately APAs are a government-to-government process from our perspective, and one where substantial changes can happen over the course of a single CA meeting. So it's often not possible to give that kind of step-by-step update, but clear and open communication between CAs and taxpayers will help to resolve any misunderstandings or manage expectations around that. Information gathering is another key aspect which comes out throughout the BAPAM, and I'll say from my experiences, it isn't always immediately possible to provide all information needed by CAs in just the APA application. And so we get onto the question of, well, how do we obtain that further information? And here we have best practice aimed at both taxpayers and CAs. So CAs should be targeted in their information requests and open to clarifying the reasons behind their requests, as suggested in Best Practice 20. However, it is important that taxpayers recognise that delays in providing this information can hold up the resolution of an APA. It's something that happens regularly, and on the topic of managing expectations and communicating, what I would, if I could get across one message today, I would say, if you are having challenges in gathering information, please tell the CA so that they can plan accordingly. Maybe that piece of information being asked about and proving difficult to obtain isn't as material as other pieces of information. So communication works both ways, but I think a lot more communication will help overall improve the APA process. Another interesting best practice, I would say, is best practice 6, which notes that the covered period should generally be 5 years at minimum and include at least 2 prospective years. So while there will probably always be those complex cases which might not be resolved during the covered period, the inclusion of 2 extra prospective years will help always ensure that the advanced element of APAs is kept alive. So this is something that we in the UK CA team have generally tried to do, especially in the recent term. But we recognise that restrictions in domestic laws of our treaty partners might mean it's not always possible. But in those situations, hopefully the combination of a speedy renewal application will still achieve that aim of ensuring that there is some advanced element to these agreements. So those are the I don't want to say key best practices, but those are some of the ones that stood out to me. But there's a whole host of information around the best practice, which is incredibly useful. I just wanted to also take this opportunity to talk about the useful discussions that we had at the MAP Forum during the creation of the BAPAM. And it was at least something that I appreciated personally, because it gave us the opportunity to discuss APA programs detached from any specific case or treaty partner, and just be quite open around how each of the CA teams approach APAs. And And many of those discussions actually summarized quite nicely in the document. So for example, we had discussions around pre-filing meetings and how they operate and their benefits, how jurisdictions approach the reviews of applications, renewals of APAs, and how jurisdictions saw the interaction of their APA and audit processes working. I know that we in the UK CA team came away from the process with a lot better understanding of how different countries have approached their APA program. And it also provided us with an opportunity to further think about how we in the UK operate our own APA program. So how we saw our interaction with our audit colleagues working and how we saw renewal applications working. So on the topic of managing expectations, I'll probably want to conclude by managing expectations and saying, from my perspective, do I see there being a drastic improvement in the overnight in terms of APA times? I'll probably say changes won't happen overnight, but I think the BAPAM does provide that strong step forward to improving the time it takes to resolve APAs, and one that begins to provide that common basis and structure across jurisdictions on how APAs are worked. And while most of these best practices, while the document only contains best practices which jurisdictions are not obliged to adopt, in my experience at least, I'd say that most, if not all, jurisdictions want to see improvements to the APA program. So I think a lot of jurisdictions will be taking a hard look at their own APA programs, looking at the best practices and seeing what ones out of these best practices can I adopt in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term, to help improve the APA programs around the world. And this is something that the BAPAM seeks to do. So I think overall the document provides useful guidance to taxpayers and tax authorities to help overcome some of the challenges in that APA program. So I'll end by saying the project as a whole, I have to say, was very well managed by the OECD and Secretariat, and I want to take the opportunity to thank the Secretariat, all the delegates and everyone else who has inputted into that work on the BAPAM. It's definitely a document to be proud of, and like I said earlier, a document which I can see being fundamental to APA programs in the future. So I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Akib. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for what you've done. Thanks a lot also for exposing a bit, what's happening in the APA space. So I hope that those that are listening have gotten a sense of the richness and the diversity of the work that we do in improving the existing systems across the different dimensions of tax certainty. We're always open for suggestions and new ideas, and ICAP was one, and I think, as Jennifer said, it's still innovative as it was, and it's not that old, including also how we got it started. So I think I would leave it at that. We do have, I think, one question. It's a question for you, Sandra, that has come in, and that's a question where, it's a sensitive question also, access to MAP. If you look back, one of the challenges we've always had is that, the experience of the taxpayers, that there are certain situations where maybe there should be access to MAP, but there isn't access to MAP, and we provided a process to help us with that also in the peer review. But if you looked at your experience in MAP, both as a competent authority and now inside the Secretariat, have we made a difference? Is it moving? And do you see the question in the future? So I think you get the last word, Sandra, here, and then we'll wrap it up and go into the break.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Well, with respect to access to map, we have, of course, the 4 specific situations that are mentioned in the minimum standard. And to give one example, access to map and transfer pricing cases, I think we have made a difference because there are now jurisdictions where there was no access to map and transfer pricing cases in the past, where there is now always access to map for transfer pricing cases. So that's like a good example and showing that we are moving into the right direction. We also have access to map in case of an audit settlement. That is still a bit problematic, I would say, because even when competent authorities are willing to provide access in case there is an audit settlement, the big problem is that taxpayers feel that when the auditor has asked them not to go to map, even when they can go to map, they feel like they perhaps shouldn't do it to not upset the auditor. So I think we are still not where we should be on that one, and I think progress can be made. On the other situations, I think it's fine. Countries have adapted their situations. They do now provide access to map in case of anti-abuse situations as required in the minimum standard. There were other situations where access was not granted, and we have dealt with them during the peer review, so that's fine. Last word, are we there then now? And I think we are not, because apart from providing access, there is also the need that you shouldn't be allowed into the program, but then something needs to be done with your map case, because otherwise you're in, but if nothing happens, you're still not really in. And so full access means that, for me, means that your case is also treated and discussed. And so this is something we shall still need to work on. And when we will talk again about the revision of the minimum standard, we will also talk about that and see whether we can do something to make access to map better than it is now, although I think it has already improved compared to the past.
Thanks a lot, Sandra. So progress has been made, but we still have work to do for the future. That's probably a theme that will run throughout. Thank you to all the panelists. First of all, you can see, competent authorities and the MAP forum is on time. We're meant to close at 2:45. We're closing at 2:44, that first panel. Ellen, I see you popping up. Did you have any reaction spontaneously to this? If you do, then, happy for you to come in briefly. Otherwise, if, as it appears, you shake your head and give the thumbs up, then I think we will go into the break, and we see you all back at 3 o'clock, where we will be moving into Pillar 1. Stay tuned. See you in 15 minutes. I think it's 3 o'clock. We have finished on time. We start on time. I also see that Sony is on time. Good to see you. I think we have Michael here that is with us, and I think it is Mark who will take us through this, and also I will hand the floor to him.
Okay, thank you very much, Achim. Thank you, everybody, and welcome back to the second part of this Tax Certainty Day. And we're moving into the discussion of the two pillars, beginning with Pillar 1. Just a very quick housekeeping reminder that any comments can be submitted through the chat function. And then, as with the last panel, if we have time at the end, we will come to those at that point. So just a few words of introduction. Tax certainty with respect to Pillar 1 is really one of the fundamental aspects of the two pillars. And with respect to Amount A, it comprises two building blocks. First of all, we have tax certainty with respect to a group's application of Amount A rules themselves. And then we have certainty over issues that sit outside of the rules for Amount A, but which can impact the application of those rules. And we refer to that as related issues. We had a public consultation, first of all, in May of this year, and then the task force on the digital economy, the TFDE, has been working since then to incorporate the feedback we got from that consultation into the progress report that was released on the 6th of October. Just to say that for the purposes of this conversation, we are focusing on Amount A. We are recognising that there is another very important aspect of Pillar 1 being Amount B, and a public consultation document on that will be released in the coming weeks. So today we're focusing on Amount A. Move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as was mentioned in the last panel, there's already extensive experience in a range of practical tools to provide greater certainty to M&E groups, and increasingly with a push for work in order to provide that certainty earlier and faster, and also to provide that certainty in a more multilateral manner. And we've really been building on those experiences in the design of the tax certainty framework for Amount A. So the Amount A framework is entirely voluntary for groups. It's triggered by a request for certainty. Tax administrations then work together through a coordinated, agreed process and based on standard documentation. So there's no requirement for groups that are in scope of these rules to provide different documents to different jurisdictions where they've got operations. In key areas, a review will focus on a group's methodologies and controls that it has in place over its application of relevant aspects of Amount A. And for those areas, that reliance on methodologies and controls allows us to provide certainty to a group on a multi-year basis over several years looking forward, subject to there being no change to a number of important critical assumptions. This coordinated process effectively eliminates the need for any separate Amount A audits in different jurisdictions, and allows us to deliver certainty to in-scope groups following fixed timeframes, and assuring that any group that requests certainty is given that certainty, and it's given a mandatory binding outcome within a reasonable period. On the next slide, we can see very quickly the different aspects of the tax certainty framework. First of all, we have what we refer to as scope certainty, which allows a group to come forward and request binding certainty on a multilateral fashion that it is not within the scope of these rules. So this will be particularly important to groups, for example, in the extractives or regulated financial services sectors, to give them comfort that they are outside the scope of rules. We also have advanced certainty, which I just mentioned, where we have a review of a group's methodologies and a group's controls over certain key elements of its systems for the purposes of complying with Amount A. And in the progress report, these are focused on revenue sourcing and on excluded revenues. These are areas where, rather than relying on information taken from the group's audited financial statements, we're expecting groups to have to put in place new systems, new methodologies, and obtain new information that they wouldn't otherwise need to hold. And so we look to give a greater level of upfront certainty over those areas that will persist for a number of years, subject to there being no change. We then also have a comprehensive certainty review, which provides an in-scope group with certainty over all aspects of its application for Amount A. And within that, we also propose in the progress report to have a transition period to support both groups and tax administrations in applying these rules for the first few years after they come into effect. All of these review processes are underpinned by the role of the determination panel, which is a panel which is really charged with resolving any outstanding disputes between tax administrations in any of these areas. And this is the fundamental aspect which guarantees certainty to any group that has requested it. And coming out of into the public consultation, I think it can be seen that the determination panel composition is one of the key outstanding issues to be resolved. Moving on to the second building block for tax certainty on Amount A, and this concerns certainty being provided more widely for related issues. And the progress report describes a process for a mandatory binding dispute resolution for virtually all of a group's pending related issues. Hopefully, much of the work that was discussed as part of the last panel, including the work on multilateral MAP, means that in any case, disputes will be being resolved more quickly in future. But where a MAP with respect to a related issue is not resolved within 2 years, there's the option for that to enter into a new binding resolution process, which will assure an outcome in 390 days, in a little bit more than a year's time. There are a number of policy issues concerning the scope and panel composition also remaining in that area. And just up to note that for certain developing economies, rather than the mandatory binding approach, we have an elective binding mechanism that will be available to certain jurisdictions. The public consultation on the progress report closed on the 11th of November, and we had 337 pages of comments from 34 respondents. Around 80% of those comments were from either business or from advisors, with others split between civil society and other commentators, individuals or academics. We will be covering most of the key issues that came out of these comments during the next 30 minutes. But I would encourage anyone to go to the OECD website, where the full list of comments, the full text of those comments is available, because it's not possible clearly for us to go through every single comment that was received today. Okay. So today I'm happy to be joined by two experts who will be giving their perspectives on the progress report and on certainty for Pillar 1 generally. First of all, I'm happy to welcome Michael Plowgen, who is Counselor to the Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy at the US Department of Treasury, and is also one of the two co-chairs of the OECD Task Force on the Digital Economy, the TFDE. And secondly, representing the voice of business, very pleased to have with us today Karen Halby, who is Senior Vice President in charge of Global Tax for Sony Group Corporation, a multinational enterprise based in Japan. So welcome to both of you for being able to join us today. I think if we stop sharing our slides, so then we can see the speakers. So Michael, Karen, welcome. First of all, Michael, if we could turn to you, and I understand that you're not in the best of health today, so I do hope that that we can make this as painless as possible. A question that, as co-chair of the task force and as a representative of government, why, in your perspective, is the tax certainty framework for Amount A such an important building block of Pillar 1 overall?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and I apologize. I am a bit under the weather, so I hope that we can make it through this without too much difficulty. But at a pragmatic level, I think the importance of the tax certainty framework for Amount A really starts with one of the things that you pointed out in your presentation, Mark, which is that Amount A is a multilateral system, and Amount A is calculated on a group level. And the way the system works is that if you have a modification anywhere, that can create adjustments for other jurisdictions as well. So if you have a dispute, in almost all cases, it's going to be a multilateral dispute. And in that context, the existing bilateral dispute resolution system is not really an option for taxpayers or tax administrations. It's not even that it would take too long and be too expensive, it just wouldn't resolve the issue. And I think taxpayers and tax administrations really have pretty similar, or at least related concerns here. One is time and resources, right? So both taxpayers and tax administrations want to make sure that disputes get resolved and don't drag on forever. And on top of that, both want to make sure that there's not double or multiple taxation. So you need a new type of system to make sure that the issues actually get resolved. And that's what we have been developing in the TFTE. Another issue is audits. Here, I think taxpayers are concerned that if they have revenue that's sourced to over 100 jurisdictions, they really don't want 100 separate inquiries every year and 100 different processes to assure compliance. And tax administrations have a related concern. The way that Amount A works, the information needed to assure compliance may not be in the jurisdiction. And indeed, as I mentioned, the results in one jurisdiction might impact the results in another jurisdiction. And so tax administrations need a centralized way to make sure that their concerns are addressed in an efficient manner. And that means you need a process that allows each jurisdiction's questions to be heard and answered and appropriate information to be shared. And then just at a higher level, a major purpose of Amount A is to stabilize the international tax architecture. So Amount A is actually kind of pointless if it creates a bunch of multilateral disputes or results in double or multiple taxation of the same income. And that's why it's really a central building block for Amount A.
Thank you very much, Michael, for those wise words. Diving into a little bit more detail, clearly certainty in general is an important aspect of Amount A. But are there any areas of the framework that you think are particularly critical aspects, and how is the work of the task force reflecting this?
Yeah, so I think all of the elements are important, or they wouldn't be in there. But I'll just focus on a couple of pieces here. The first is, as I suggested earlier, you have to develop a process that ensures that you get to a resolution in some reasonable amount of time. And that raises a lot of important issues that the TFTE has had to work through. So for example, you need a process that allows countries to raise concerns, to be heard, and to try to work out a resolution among themselves. But at some point, you have to cut that off and send the issues to a decision-making panel. When do you do that? How long do you give jurisdictions to work things out? How do you present the issues to the decision-making panel in a way that gets all the jurisdictions comfortable that their perspective is reflected, but in a way that doesn't overwhelm the decision-making panel with paper. And so many of the issues within Amount A are interconnected. So a jurisdiction's position on one issue might depend on how another issue gets resolved. So how do you give jurisdictions a chance to reflect that without going back to the decision-making panel a bunch of times, or without a bunch of if-then decision trees being submitted by each jurisdiction? And should the decisions be precedential or not? And here the clear answer by jurisdictions is that the decisions should not be precedential. But then you worry about creating different results for similarly situated taxpayers, and how do you address that concern? And who should be on the determination panels, the decision-making panels? Some think that it would be better if both businesses and governments, that it would be better to have government representatives on the decision-making panel because they're subject to political oversight, and this Amount A system is fundamentally an intergovernmental arrangement. Others think that it's not possible to have a manageable number of government representatives while actually being representative on the determination panel, and that the whole reason for the determination panel in the first place is that governments were not able to agree among themselves in the first part of the process. So the TFD has really been wrestling with all these issues and more regarding the determination panels. And that's why you see in the progress report some of the elements that you see about determination panels, as well as some of the open questions that remain. The second aspect I want to talk about is advanced certainty, which provides taxpayers with certainty regarding certain elements in advance of the period in question. And in particular, that is focused on the systems needed for revenue sourcing. Excuse me. The revenue sourcing rules for Amount A are novel, and they will require taxpayers to modify their systems to gather the relevant data. And taxpayers obviously want to know, if I modify my systems in this way, will I be treated as having done the right thing or not? And for governments, the issue is that if taxpayers don't put in place the right systems to collect the right data, and you review the systems after the period in question, it's too late, right? There's no way to collect the relevant information at that point. So both taxpayers and tax administrations have an interest in getting that right. And then finally, I just want to note the issue of scope certainty, which you raised as well. Given the limited scope of Amount A and the significant compliance obligations for groups in scope, it's going to be really important to have an efficient way for groups to establish whether or not they are in scope. And there, you obviously don't want to require all groups worldwide to go through the scope certainty process, only those for which there may be some question. But you also have to provide clear and workable procedures for groups that think they're out of scope, but are later determined to be in scope. And that's been a key issue for the TFDE's work here.
Thank you very much, Michael. So moving on from Amount A, the remainder of the progress report and the entire progress report that was released in July was really focusing on a discussion of design aspects of the rules for Amount A. Why, from your point of view, is certainty for other issues that are related to Amount A also such a critical part of this framework?
Yeah, so the issues related to Amount A, I have always thought that it was somewhat of an unfortunate term, because I think it sort of hides the ball as to what we're really talking about. Issues related to Amount A are really issues about how the existing system allocates taxing rights among jurisdictions. So things like transfer pricing disputes. And you might sort of initially think that Amount A is a totally separate system. So why are transfer pricing disputes related to Amount A? And the reason for that is that Amount A is a reallocation of taxing rights among jurisdictions based on where revenues are sourced. But the Amount A system is impacted by the existing allocation of taxing rights in two main ways. One is through elimination of double taxation. The way the elimination of double taxation regime works, we have to know how the existing system divides up taxing rights. So we can say that those jurisdictions that tax residual profits must provide relief of double tax. The second is the MDSH, which says that a country's Amount A allocation will be reduced if it already taxes residual profits. So for the Amount A system to work, we need to know how or which countries are taxing residual profits under the existing system. And that's why tax certainty for issues related to Amount A is so important. We need a way to make sure that disputes under the existing system, right, as to which jurisdiction has the rights to tax particular profits, that those disputes are resolved quickly. So we know which jurisdictions are taxing which profits, and so that we can apply Amount A correctly. The other issue that I just want to mention briefly here is the pragmatic issue of, why should businesses support Pillar 1? And as I mentioned, one major purpose of Amount A is to restabilize the international tax system. That's great, but it's also a little bit abstract. And one of the things that we hear from businesses is that getting tax certainty on a broad range of disputes under the existing system is something that would be valuable to them. And I might add that many tax administrations think that it's a valuable goal as well.
Michael, thank you. So now turning to the voice of business today, Karen, can I first welcome to the meeting, and then can I also ask similar questions to yourself from the perspective of a group that may be in the scope of these rules once they come into force? So first of all, why is the tax certainty framework for Amount A considered by business to be such an important building block of the pillar?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for this opportunity to present some of the views of the business community with respect to the current position paper on tax certainty. And I also want to thank the OECD Secretariat and the countries represented on the TFE who have worked tirelessly on this very challenging project. Pillar 1 is challenging because it seeks to create a unique set of rules to reallocate the taxing rights on income across the globe. And while the rules try to be based on formulas with objective criteria in the hopes of preventing such disputes, it's inevitable that there will be some disputes and some discussion on interpretation. And therefore, it's critical that we have a tax certainty process, because it's inevitable, as Michael said, that such disputes will have multilateral impacts. And that making that resolution is going to be challenging for both governments and taxpayers. But failure to resolve such disputes completely will result in multiple levels of taxation. And I think both governments and business agree that the avoidance of that was one of the core principles of this project.
Okay, thank you. So we had the first consultation before the summer, and the task force did a lot of work working through the comments that were received, and then we put out the new progress report in October, hopefully reflecting many of the comments that were received from business commentators. What do you think that the task force is getting right in the progress report in terms of how we're delivering certainty? And are there any particularly important elements where you think that further work is needed and that could be improved?
So the tax certainty procedures, as you said, are the very foundation of these rules, and they are critical to the success of overall Pillar 1. First, I think what you got right is we're really pleased that the OECD Secretariat has allowed business stakeholders to participate in the process and have reflected many of our comments in the most recently revised provisions. We appreciate the recognition that business will need to make system changes to comply with these new and unique rules, and that such changes to large ERP systems are expensive and they take time to implement. We appreciate the soft landings on particularly challenging areas and acceptance that proxies may be used in the place of more difficult data-driven formulas where such data may not be available currently. Nevertheless, there are still improvements that need to be made for the tax certainty rules to work in practice, and I would like to highlight some of those key points today. The scope certainty procedures certainly are very helpful. However, the scope of the advanced certainty process needs to be expanded to cover all Amount A methodology-based elements. And while revenue sourcing and segment reporting are important, elimination methods, marketing distribution safe harbors, and withholding taxes should also be addressed to maximize the benefits of such certainty process by resolving all possible uncertainties related to Amount A upfront. The advanced certainty process must also be advanced. Taxpayers should not be required to file tax returns and pay additional taxes for Amount A until a final conclusion is reached. Otherwise, tax returns could be filed in over 100 jurisdictions for multiple years and taxes paid and relieved, only to have to file amended returns in all of those same jurisdictions for multiple years and be left trying to recover the overpayments and adjust the underpayments. Payments should be suspended during this process. Penalties and interest, whether on payments or refunds, should be waived when finally settled. And tax audits should also be suspended during this process so that the tax certainty process remains centralized and coordinated and has time to work as intended. The validity of the certainty review should be guaranteed for a sufficient period based on the assumption that significant development and modification of systems will take place after the conclusion of the review panel. Flexibility is desirable to ensure that the period covered by the advanced certainty review takes into account the time required for the M&E to develop, test, and improve internal control systems to the required level, and that M&Es are not left with a very short period to be covered by the ruling following the implementation of the recommendations by the review panel. If an M&E systems have been confirmed as acceptable by the review panel, there are no grounds to significantly shorten the period covered by the advanced certainty review, simply because it took time to put in place the internal control systems required. While we appreciate the taxpayer's role in the certainty process has been expanded, it still needs to be expanded further. The taxpayer has the facts and knows its business. There should be continuous and open dialogue between the appeals panels and the taxpayer. We continue to be concerned about the overly bureaucratic and time-consuming ruling process that's envisioned. While we appreciate the desire for inclusiveness among the governments, the reality is that the process will take too long to be effective if we cannot streamline it further and commit to hard and fast deadlines, and perhaps even run some of the processes concurrently. Business views, similar to government views, it sounds like, on the composition of the determination panel also continue to be divided. Some companies feel very strongly that they should be made up of government experts. Others feel very strongly that they should be made up of independent experts, or at least mixed. I'm personally in the latter camp, but I cannot speak for the other businesses on this issue. Confidentiality also continues to be of great concern. The application includes enormous amounts of detailed and highly sensitive data. And while the rules try to prescribe strict confidentiality rules, the wide distribution of such data that is currently contemplated creates enormous risk of data leaks and exposure. More controls and limits on distribution are necessary to mitigate those risks. The expert advisory group for the internal control reviews of systems is not workable in its current format. I think the extensive comments submitted on this point are evidence of that. Many of the systems controls will be centralized in either the headquarters of the group or even in different business segments. The types of internal control reviews require systems knowledge, which is generally found only in large tax administrations, and even then only at the field level audit team. Pulling such individuals together on a multi-country team will result in language barriers among themselves and between the group and the systems experts at the taxpayer. ERP systems are complex and they're tailored to the business that is using them. Thus, there is a huge learning curve for an expert team trying to audit them. We believe that the only practical solution to the internal control review is to leverage the work of the M&E's external financial auditors who are already familiar with the M&E systems. We believe that while ground rules for the audit can be established, in the end, the certainty process should rely on the review by the financial auditor and an attestation from the financial auditor regarding the robustness of such controls at the M&E.
Thank you very much, Karen. And I think while today is focusing on aspects of the tax certainty framework, a couple of your comments also went into the area of administration, and that is another area where the task force we've been consulting and further work and discussion is ongoing about how kind of the multinational and multilateral administration of these rules must be made to work both from a tax administration and from a business perspective. So moving on strictly from the rules for Amount A, and thinking about the certainty for in-scope groups over issues outside of Amount A but related to Amount A, how important is this broader certainty to business in the context of the pillars?
It's very important. As a large multinational, we often have transfer pricing disputes that require MAP and or APA procedures to resolve effectively. We've experienced many delays, often due to the current backload of cases with the governments. The majority of cases in MAP today tend to be related to routine distribution returns. So we look forward to the upcoming paper on Amount B to see if that will help bring more certainty and minimize these disputes. We would also like to see continual adoption of mandatory binding arbitration, as well as stricter deadlines to encourage faster resolutions. Many of these MAP cases go on for years and years and years before ultimate resolution is met. The most difficult issues to resolve today, however, are transfer pricing disputes that are multilateral. With complex global supply chains, these disputes are increasing. In addition, Pillar 1 is creating a whole new tax regime that is by definition multilateral. And yet, the comprehensive certainty review on Pillar 1 in the current paper does not cover multilateral disputes and limits itself to the existing bilateral dispute framework in the treaties. Why would we not take this opportunity to create a multilateral system in the MLC? This is the perfect time to create a legal framework and process for resolving such disputes. And without it, we believe that a significant gap in the tax certainty process will remain, and double taxation will continue to be a problem.
Okay, thank you very much, both Michael and Karen, for answers to those questions. Just one additional point coming out of the public consultation that was touched on by Michael, but hasn't been drawn out fully. I just want to mention for listeners today, it concerns the importance of the possibility for all signatories to the upcoming multilateral convention, all participating jurisdictions, to have the ability to be involved in these processes. And some of the written comments that we received were quite clear that this is something which is fundamental to the ability of countries to engage. I just want to reflect for listeners that this is something which the task force is taking seriously in its considerations, and will be something that continues to be an important issue, both in terms of the design of rules and then supporting tax administrations in the implementation and in the operation of those rules. And then just to repeat for everyone that, well, I think Karen and Michael did an excellent job of summarising many of the key comments. Please go to our website where we've got the full written text of all of the comments that came in from the public consultation. That is available. Now we have a few minutes left before the end of this session. I would like to go back to Michael and Karen just to ask them to give their kind of 30-second soundbite, their closing thoughts for the day, but looking to my colleagues and perhaps Akim, if somebody has been monitoring the comments coming through chat, whether we've had any questions or comments that to any of the members of the panel. Otherwise, we will have a few more minutes to talk about pillar 2 in a moment. But first of all, perhaps Michael first and then Karen. If at the end of this conversation, I can invite you to give your 30 seconds, 1 minute soundbite, your closing thoughts for us to take away from this conversation. Please, Michael.
Sure, thanks. So I think my basic thoughts on this are that tax certainty is clearly a critical building block for Amount A, and indeed tax certainty for Amount A is one of the handful of truly novel building blocks for Pillar 1, and so there are lots of new issues that the TFTE has had to work through in order to try to develop a system that will work efficiently. And the public consultation process has been very helpful in refining the approach to tax certainty. I also, again, do want to stress that, excuse me, tax certainty for issues related to Amount A really presents an opportunity for significant progress on dispute resolution under the existing allocation of taxing rights to reduce the time and resources spent on those disputes by both taxpayers and tax administrations. And we really should seize that opportunity as part of the move to Amount A. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michael. And Karen, please, your final thoughts.
First, again, I want to thank you for inviting me to speak today. I really have appreciated the dialogue to date with the OECD and the governments, and I look forward to further collaboration. To be effective, tax certainty and dispute resolution procedures need to be efficient, they need to be timely and practical. And as governments continue to develop these procedures, including as part of Pillar 1, we believe it's important that they continue to engage with business to make sure such solutions are workable and achieve the ultimate goal of avoiding the double taxation.
Thank you very much, both of you, for taking the time to join us today. I think all of these comments and everything from the public consultation will be taken back to the task force for its conversations as we move forward in the final development of the MLC, and then also in terms of how we're actually going to operationalise these rules and make them work during and following implementation. Achim, I see you've turned your camera on, and if you have any thoughts on this panel, or otherwise we can move on to perhaps Pillar 2.
I think we could have a long conversation. We have Karen here and Michael, and how we make this better. And we also, I think, need to see the balancing between the possible and the achievable. And I think we've moved it quite a bit, but Karen reminds us that we're still not there, but he at least recognizes that we keep on moving. So let's see whether we can land this in a place where we get a smile from Michael and Karen. That's sort of what we're trying to target. Now, given that Michael is also a bit under the weather, I will not ask you another question of giving you your sound bets in 10 seconds and back to you in 5 seconds. I think we will let you both go. Thanks very much for your participation on this. And with this, then we are turning to the next session, which looks at the tax certainty dimension of Pillar 2. We understand that Marco Juminale has just been called to the minister, but nevertheless, we will start with Felicie and then we will figure out the rest. So the floor is yours, Felicie.
Thank you very much, Achim. And yes, so now we turn ourselves to the session on Pillar 2. That will focus on the global rules. And so in this panel, we were supposed to have a first introduction of the topic by myself, and then have Marco Juminale present the perspective of the chair of WP11, who has just told us, as Achim said, that he will not be able to join us, but we will try and find a replacement. And then we will finish this session with Daniel Goodman, who you may know, and who is a professor at the Sorbonne Law School, and also a partner with CMS Francis Lefebvre. So maybe an introduction from me on what we are doing in the global rules space in relation to tax certainty. As maybe some of you know, I have taken some Krav Maga courses in the past, and this is a kind of self-defense class where the teacher actually tells us that the best way to not be hurt in a fight is actually not to fight. So that's why prevention of disputes is always so key to every aspect of tax certainty. And we are doing the same in the global space, because we have done a lot in relation to prevention of tax disputes. in order to promote an environment where the rules can be applied in a certain manner and to promote tax certainty in the application of the rules and in the interpretation of the rules. This has started with a common approach. So you know that the global rules are intended to be introduced into the domestic law of the jurisdictions that want to do that. And the intention is then for those jurisdictions to follow the model legislation that has been prepared by the inclusive framework and that has been supplemented with a very detailed commentary that explains how the rules are to be interpreted and applied in very specific circumstances. So the inclusive framework itself has decided that for the rules to interact as best as possible together, relying on a model legislation was certainly the best way to make sure that the legislation themselves were compatible with each other. But it didn't stop there. The inclusive framework also suggested that future administrative guidance could be released to actually supplement the commentary in this area where it's not entirely clear or where it can be made clearer. And so that is the very first important step for ensuring a consistent and a coordinated application of the group rules for those jurisdictions that have that want to implement them. But it's not only that, even the rules themselves actually, as they were designed, include some mechanics that will promote the tax certainty as they are being applied. And that follows from the fact that a lot of aspects of the rules are mechanical and do not rely on a facts and circumstances test. So they are supposed to lead to more objective applications by the relevant jurisdictions who are going to apply them and to give rise to fewer disputes, which then in turn, of course, would promote tax certainty. We also have an application of a rule order that is embedded in the legislation itself, so in the model legislation, but also in every legislation that will implement the global rules, because and then in accordance with the rule order, each jurisdiction agrees to turn off its own rules if another jurisdiction's rules are applicable, or to apply them in a certain way that then allocates the top-up tax that is to be paid, if any, in those jurisdictions where the global rules apply. And the rule order has been designed in a way that actually gives then that applies in a central manner, which means that in most cases, the income inclusion rule will apply in the UP jurisdiction, where the UP jurisdiction has adopted the global rules, and then there will be very only limited instances where the disputes could arise, and you know that the UTPR, the backstop rule that is providing for an allocation mechanism of the top-up tax that is to be paid, would only apply in exceptional cases. So that's what has been done in terms of designing the rules themselves. Now, what is also required for this rule order to operate in accordance with the model legislation, what is required is that these rules are considered as qualified. This is defined in the model global rules as rules that are consistent with the model global rules, and this will also be assessed in accordance with a multilateral review mechanism that then will be conducted at the level of the inclusive framework, with a view to, of course, reaching a common interpretation and a common assessment as to whether a given rule is considered as qualified or not. The idea here, of course, would be to develop such a mechanism in a robust and transparent way in order to make sure that the outcome of this mechanism is not challenged by the jurisdictions and provide a lot of certainty to all the stakeholders. Then there could be further mechanisms that could be developed over time to make sure that that disputes keep to be prevented over as the rules are being applied. So not only upon introduction of the rules, but also as they are being applied by the relevant jurisdictions. Here, what I could maybe stress is that we are currently in the development of a standardized globe information return, which is a common set of data points that all jurisdictions, all implementing jurisdictions would use for purposes of assessing whether a top-up tax is due in their own jurisdictions. And because the jurisdictions would have this common set of data points to assess together where necessary the relevant tax liability, then we also think that this would prevent disputes from happening because they would be also able to rely on a common set of information. Further mechanisms could also be developed over time in relation to the application of the globe rules. For instance, some have been suggested, such as a common risk assessment tool that could be done, again, knowing that we would have, all jurisdictions would have these common data points as a starting point, and they could also analyze together how they could perform some automated risk assessment on the basis of those data points. So this was to give a brief overview of the work that could be and that was undertaken and that could be undertaken in relation to dispute prevention. We also are aware of the fact that even if we want to prevent as many disputes as possible, it is possible that we cannot prevent all of them, and that there could be some situations where M&Es could be subject to the rules in more than one jurisdiction. And when I mean could be subject to the rules, I actually mean that M&Es could be required to pay top-up tax in more than one jurisdiction in a way that interact with each other. So, for instance, this can be the case when the UPE jurisdiction imposes top-up tax under an income inclusion rule, but also another jurisdiction under the partially owned parent entity mechanism imposes top-up tax as well. So when the M&E now needs to make a single computation in respect of a low tax jurisdiction to support the top-up tax computation in two different jurisdictions, then these are circumstances where an M&E also need to have certainty as to which interpretation should prevail if there is an uncertainty between the two jurisdictions. And so maybe on a case-by-case basis here, there could be a need for a kind of a dispute resolution mechanism or a kind of alignment of views among the jurisdictions that are applying the globe rules when they affect a single M&E that needs to pay top-up tax in these two jurisdictions. For this, then the idea would be to analyze whether it is possible to have a process that could work in a similar way as a mutual agreement procedure. So basically, that would give the M&E the possibility to submit a request to a tax administration and to then allow some representatives of that tax administration, such as the competent authorities, to discuss together with a view to reaching an agreement that resolves any difference in the application or the interpretation of the rules, and then have any agreement being implemented with a view to eliminating the taxation that caused the issue in those circumstances. For such a mechanic to apply, currently we have tax treaties that apply for other purposes. Here, the question would be what kind of instrument could work for purposes of the globe rules? Because as we have explored in the blueprints 2 years ago, we were saying that maybe one approach that could be analyzed and explored is whether existing tax treaties could provide a basis for such a procedure to take place. Existing tax treaties, provide in, when they follow the OECD Model Tax Convention, provide in Article 25.3, second sentence, the possibility for competent authorities to consult together and eliminate any double taxation that could arise in cases that are not covered by the convention. So this could be, the application of the globe rules could be a good candidate for this purpose. In the blueprint, we were also exploring the possibility to have a mechanism that is supported by the Convention on the Multilateral Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, so the MAC, because this instrument could also be the basis for early discussions or for exchange of information and simultaneous tax examinations that involve competent authorities, and that could be applicable also for under the GLOBE rules, before the GLOBE rules. The October statement that was released last year referred to the fact that the inclusive framework would explore the merits of a multilateral convention for purposes of for those jurisdictions that will implement the GLOBE rules, and then such a multilateral convention could embed a provision that looks like a MAP provision that is included in tax treaties, and then require the implementing jurisdictions to come to an agreement where there is taxation at stake. And the last option that could be explored is the one that was presented to you for those who followed the public consultation that we and the meeting that we had in April. There was a proposal that Daniel presented, Robert presented at that public consultation, but Daniel will further expand on this during his presentation later today. The idea was to introduce a kind of a provision that provides for a substitute for a mutual agreement procedure into domestic law of the implementing jurisdictions based on a reciprocal application of those provisions in those implementing jurisdictions. And then the provision would give the competent authorities the mandate to resolve potential difficulties that would arise in relation to the application of the GLOBE rules and give tax relief where necessary. So after this broad technical overview of the options that are explored or available for purposes of preventing and resolving disputes for the GLOBE rules, I think I will pass it back to Akim or maybe John, who I see now here, to cover maybe what Marco would have covered. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yes. No, we can deal with uncertainty. This is Tax Certainty Day. We remain calm, even if we don't know what we're doing. No, I think the idea, Felicie, I think that we would be as Italian as we can be. So you get half of a German and half of a Spanish, whatever you are, New Zealand, and we'll try our best. So I think we have a sense of where the Working Party stands, and I think you have a couple of questions that you would have asked Marco. We will try to respond to the best of our abilities. So if you go ahead, Felicie, then we will try to be Marco and see how we do. And then I think we will go over to Daniel.
Sorry, I was muted. Actually, my first question to Marco would have been, so what is the status of the work on all the options that have just presented? What are the next priorities of WP11? Sorry, the light is turning off. So what is the status actually on dispute prevention and dispute resolution?
And John, you're also muted.
Yes, exactly. I had to come off mute as well. So I think I can take that question. So in terms of the current status of the work in respect of Pillar 2, we had a public consultation, of course, in the beginning of this year, immediately following the release of the commentary, where we encouraged input from stakeholders on what they saw as the key priorities for implementation in relation to Pillar 2. A number of areas were identified, including, the safe harbors, but also further administrative guidance, work on the global information return, but also importantly, an exploration of tax certainty mechanisms, including dispute prevention and resolution mechanisms. The big priority has been in the last 6 months or so is developing those items of administrative guidance which are key for countries in order for them to be able to implement, to legislate the rules. So what has happened is countries have gone out, they have in many cases conducted their own consultations in relation to the implementation of these rules, and they've identified a number of areas where they feel that additional clarity or simplification is required into the operation of the rules. And that has been one of the big priorities that we have been pursuing. The other is in relation to safe harbors, where we see safe harbors as being a very important part of delivering both certainty to taxpayers, but also facilitating compliance and administration of the rules, particularly during the initial years when they're being introduced and the rules are unfamiliar to both tax administrations and taxpayers. And we have been working on the development of a transitional safe harbor that would apply, as well as a permanent safe harbors and other simplifications. We have also started work looking at the potential for developing both dispute prevention and dispute resolution mechanisms, including working active consideration of a dispute resolution provision and the mechanism for delivering that dispute resolution provision, be it through some kind of multilateral instrument or through a domestic implementation, or potentially both.
Thank you, John. So I think maybe then the next question is, what is the status of the work in relation to the multilateral review mechanism and the qualified rule status?
So good question. So I think that the work obviously on the multilateral review process really gets going once countries have kickstarted their legislative processes, and so because we're in the early stages yet, we haven't formally put together the body that will do that peer review process, but we do anticipate that that will begin very shortly, and in fact shortly after releasing the implementation package. The intention here is consistently with the other review processes that we have designed. The countries would bring the rules that they have developed, often prior to them being legislated, and solicit the view of the working party as to whether these rules met the requirements for being treated as qualified rules, and therefore benefiting from the rule order that is embedded within the design of the rules themselves. The mechanism would make sure that focus is not just on the implementation, but also on the consistent administration of those rules. And it would involve a process whereby the working party would determine whether those rules have a qualifying status. There would then be publication of that outcome or release of information in relation to that outcome, so that effectively there would be a list that we would be able to maintain that would allow both MNEs and other countries to see which countries have qualified rules in place, and accordingly understand the intended rule order in relation to those rules. That would apply both to the income inclusion rule and the UTPR, but also to the qualified domestic minimum top-up tax that is also forms part of the global rules.
Thank you, John. And to give you a little bit of a break, the next question is for Achim. And Achim, so can you tell us what is your vision of the other mechanisms that can be explored further in relation to the coordinated risk assessment, for instance, and this kind of processes that could be put in place for continuous coordination of the global rules?
Thanks a lot. And I think that ties nicely to the rest of the program if we think about it. Because we would be starting with hopefully as much guidance as we can agree. So the situations where there is a disagreement are minimized through the ongoing guidance process. It will continue, I think, also through the peer review process, and importantly, also through the Globe information return, so that every tax administration will start with the same data set. Now, if we then look back to some of the things we've heard on the first panel, it's not rocket science to think, well, if we then have the application of a rule, and in particular the UTPR, where we have multiple tax administrations potentially involved in the application of the rule, that as you move from the assessment stage here, that you could think it might be more effective to do a coordinated risk assessment based on data points. We might be able to facilitate that with certain tools, and we've done something similar in the FDA space, and Mark is here on the CBC space, and we've provided some tools so that I think there would be something, and we'll talk about, I think, the backstop, if you wish, about potential inclusion of specific dispute resolution mechanisms in the moment. But there is sort of a systemic point where you think, well, we have created this coordinated environment through the common return, through the review process and the guidance that we do, that also in this space, it'd be logical for tax administrations to work together where they apply the same rule that they have respectively legislated. And then they should also identify risks using potentially the same risk indicators. So we do see a work stream here also for, I think, in particular, the Foreign Tax Administration, where we can look into the coordinated compliance space, and in particular, then also focus where we get into these situations where we focus on early risk assessment, taking some of the learnings out of ICAP and rethinking them for the application of Pillar 2.
Thank you very much. So
I'm sure that's what Marco would have said.
Yeah. So my next question is really in relation to the dispute resolution then, because we've covered dispute prevention now. So can you tell us maybe a bit more also in relation to the status of the work at the WP11 level in relation to dispute resolution under the group rules?
Absolutely. I mean, first, I think the question of the significance of this also, of course, depends on, in this sort of dynamic environment, on the adoption of which rules. Do we have a situation where we have a significant number of application of rules that are by design highly coordinated, or do we see more application of rules that are essentially administered by one particular jurisdiction, such as the IIR? I think that's sort of dimension. And then, you know, there's a timing point, I think, that we also hear in Working Party 11 and the overall prioritization, in a sense that you know, sort of for disputes to arise that would have to filter through from the effective date. And so you know, that's, I think there's a time dimension as we reflect about this. That doesn't mean that this is not an urgent issue, but it is an issue where I think we have some time before the first disputes would likely arise. But I think that also means it's a good time to think about what we can build in this space. And as you mentioned, Felicie, there's a couple of options that are being discussed in the Working Party. You know, do we have something? If we have something, is this existing treaties? And we recognize the limitations of existing treaties. So if we decided to do something, and that's also what we hear in the Working Party, if you did do something, then the existing treaties have some very severe limitations in what you can achieve within the context of the existing treaties. Without going through details, I think we all agree in terms of question of covered tax and the ability to do this, which is to some degree in the discretion of competent authorities, and some of them are not actually able to use that discretion under domestic law. So there's relatively little. Then I think, as you also said, you know, there is the idea of perhaps having a multilateral instrument, right? A multilateral instrument where there could be a dispute resolution provision. And that's something that we have said throughout, that, you know, we are exploring the possible use of a multilateral convention. If you look back in some of the earlier statements, Blueprint and earlier, that's always been a question. And that's certainly something that, you know, we're exploring. Is that possible with all the challenges of ratification and the timing, et cetera? So I think that's something that the Working Party is looking at. Then there's combinations where you also said there could be competent authority agreements. There's the Mutual Administrative Convention, and so maybe there's something here as well. I think then last, I think we are also exploring as a possibility the domestic law approach, right? That has been raised in the discussions. And I think here, if we listen to some of the delegates, then, you know, this is understood to be, and it is, a relatively novel process, right? So there's a question of, you know, we tend to not have that in the tech space. There may be some exceptions where, in fact, we already have that in exceptional cases. But I think intellectually, it sort of raises the question of the construction, and sometimes also under constitutional domestic law, because effectively it may be perceived as giving a competent authority the ability to overrule, if you wish, the domestic law that would otherwise apply by reference to the model rules. Whereas in the traditional context, we accept to some degree the superiority of the multilateral treaty or the bilateral treaty, the treaty law. And to the extent, if we get into the MAP provisions, as we've discussed, that there is an incorrect application, we can come to a common understanding, but it's that treaty that sits there. Whereas here, we would be in a situation that we only have 2 domestic laws and no treaty. So how can it be constructed that we have a domestic provision that gives authority to a competent authority to deviate from one part of domestic law given by another part of domestic law? And I think that's some of the challenges that delegates need to think through, amongst other challenges, of how this would work, whether that is possible in the domestic laws, how it would operate, what the limitations might be. I think that's some of the things that we're hearing. I don't know, John, whether you're hearing other aspects in this. By all means, then come in.
You're on mute, John.
Thank you. I am too. No, I think that's an accurate summary, Arkham. And I mean, I think the other thing that is also what a question that sort of needs testing is the relationship between some of the dispute prevention mechanisms that are already embedded in the rules or that may be adapted to fit these rules, and the dispute resolution context, and making sure that there is no disconnect between those outcomes. I think it's not an important element.
Thank you very much, both of you, for stepping in at the very, very last minute. That was really appreciated. So now we will turn it back to Daniel, actually, who I can't see on my screen, but I guess he's online, I hope, to cover the last presentation of this panel. Daniel? Yes.
I am indeed online. I don't know whether you can see me on your screen.
Your video seems to be off. I don't know. We can't see you, but
well,
we can hear you.
That's a pity, but what really counts is the substance, right?
Sure.
So, well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Felicie, and more generally the organizers of this Tax Certainty Day for your kind invitation to say a few words today. Now, I will do this in my own name, of course, but also on behalf of a small group, which is composed of Professor Robert Danon, Guglielmo Maisto, Adolfo Martin Jimenez, and myself. This group has conducted a reflection on the relevance of a dispute resolution mechanism for Pillar 2. And we have provided an input during the public consultation that was organized earlier this year. If you're really interested, you can even see more details of our proposals in an article that we published in the World Tax Journal. Now, time being short, let me just provide a few comments on what has just been presented. The first comment I'd like to make is that GLOBE rules require both a dispute prevention framework and a dispute resolution framework. Regarding dispute prevention, we've just heard that there are several procedural options on the table, and it seems to us that all are viable and deserve to be explored. I think in order to prevent disputes on substance, we would also welcome the continuation of the work conducted by the inclusive framework through later commentaries or guidelines. The importance of these guidelines is already recognized by the current section 831 of the model rules, which lays down that the tax administration of the implementing jurisdiction shall, subject to any requirements of domestic law, apply the GLOBE rules in accordance with any administrative guidance. In our view, this provision could probably be strengthened by a more explicit statement providing that unclear or incomplete domestic legislation should be interpreted in the light of the internationally coordinated system of minimum taxation that is reflected in the GLOBE model rules. It seems to us that such a general canon of interpretation would alone prevent a number of disputes with other jurisdictions. However, these preventive initiatives can probably not suffice to conclude that no dispute resolution mechanism is needed. You've talked about the peer review process, which is of course essential, but it will probably indeed deal with legislations implementing the GLOBE rules, and it will probably not be able to cover all administrative guidelines and practices, which may create mismatches with other jurisdictions. Besides, one can hardly imagine that all potential difficulties will be solved in advance by a coordinated risk assessment process for GLOBE purposes and by APAs. Lastly, I'd like to say that even the superhuman work conducted by the OECD and the inclusive framework nevertheless remains human. And as any human work in the field of legislation, it can not anticipate all possible difficulties which are likely to arise. So it's necessary to be able to cope with these difficulties when they do arise. So the next question is therefore, of course, to identify the most relevant dispute resolution framework for GLOBE rules. Of course, the best system would be to have a multilateral treaty, providing for a mutual agreement procedure and a binding dispute resolution procedure in case the map incorporated in this multilateral treaty does not solve all the problems. This should remain an objective for the medium term, but it's probably not very realistic in the short term. And that's the reason why we suggested that the design of a domestic model rule could embed a system of dispute resolution, which would in substance provide taxpayers with the same procedural guarantees as that offered by a classical mutual agreement procedure. Of course, this system would only work if all jurisdictions following the common approach of GLOBE rules adopted parallel domestic legislations that would operate in mirror with respect to each other, and if the implementation of the system was conditional upon reciprocity. So at the end of the day, as you can see, the idea amounts to achieving through mirror domestic legislations an outcome which is usually reached through bilateral or multilateral treaties. Let me mention briefly in this respect that this legislative technique is not entirely new. This has been alluded to by Achim Pross earlier. One example, which is of course a specific example, is what we see in several jurisdictions where there is no tax treaty with Taiwan, but there is a legislation which reflects the OECD model and which defines how double taxation is to be solved in respect of international situations involving this territory. In reciprocity, Taiwan has adopted a mirror legislation, and the outcome is that we have a functional equivalent for tax treaties. Of course, this example is not connected to dispute resolution only, but what it shows is that we already have some precedents displaying how mirror domestic legislations can coordinate harmoniously. Now, if you think about the drafting of those domestic model rules, they could, of course, take place in several ways. One can simply refer to the content of Article 25.
Sorry, Daniel, could we please
ask,
I think, one of the delegates to be on mute while we have the speaker. Thank you very much. Sorry, Daniel, to interrupt. Please go on.
No problem. Yes, what I was saying is that if you think about the potential drafting of such a domestic legislation, well, you can have several options on the table. You can have one where the domestic rule simply refers to Article 25 of the OECD model. It could also be more specific and provide the details of the procedure in the domestic rule itself. What really matters at the end of the day is to solve the problems which are triggered by uncoordinated implementation of the globe rules. Now, we've heard earlier that the Secretariat seems to consider this idea of parallel domestic legislations as a viable option, or at least an interesting one, which as such is very good news, of course. But I understand that has been said by Achim Pross earlier, that some concerns have been expressed that those domestic provisions could infringe fundamental principles enshrined in legal systems or in legal constitutions. So let me address these concerns briefly, without overlooking, of course, that the substance of these principles may vary from country to country. One of the potential objections consists in saying that a domestic rule regarding dispute resolution cannot possibly have the effect of setting aside another domestic substantive tax rule of the same jurisdiction. This objection, if you take it in isolation, appears to be rather weak, as conflicts of domestic rules are a very ordinary problem. And that problem can usually be solved by recognizing the primacy of the special rule over the more general rule, or more simply by recognizing that the exceptional rule prevails over the principal rule. So in our case, the problem could be solved if the domestic model rule governing dispute resolution was drafted in such a way that its exceptional character was explicitly laid down. There is a more fundamental objection, which relates to the former, but which is not identical to it, which relates to the idea that the principle of legality of taxation would be infringed if the competent authorities of a domestic jurisdiction were allowed to disregard their own legislation through a bilateral or a multilateral agreement with another competent authority. The first reaction to this objection could be to say, well, that this phenomenon of disapplication may happen when a mutual agreement is reached by tax authorities in the course of a map. But of course, I'm aware that our problem today is different insofar as maps are provided by tax treaties, which in many countries have a higher rank than domestic tax legislations. So the objection must therefore be addressed differently, and that's where I'd like to highlight three fundamental ideas. One, the principle of legality would certainly be infringed if the competent authority's power to set aside a domestic provision did not rely on a legal basis of the same rank of that provision. But this is not the system that is being contemplated, as the globe dispute resolution mechanism should, of course, be defined by legislative rule. Two, the principle of legality would also be infringed if the law allowed the competent authorities to disregard their own legislation arbitrarily. But again, that's not the system that is being contemplated. The entire globe framework relies on the assumption that all participating jurisdictions have agreed to a common approach, which is expressed in the model rules. And that common approach should certainly be explicitly recalled in the preamble of the model domestic rules in order both to justify the power of the tax authorities and to limit the arbitrary character of the decision-making power, which ought to be conferred on them. And lastly, and that drives me back to my opening observations, let us remember that a domestic dispute resolution mechanism would only have to play in exceptional circumstances. If we assume that the peer review process will eliminate 95% of contradictions between domestic legislations and globe model rules, and that many identified issues will have been dealt with before tax audits take place, this leaves us with a very limited number of cases where disputes will have to be solved ex post. And when they do, they should mostly deal with issues of interpretation, for which no potential conflict with the principle of legality can be identified. And for the rest, so for the remaining disputes, I think that strong arguments support the idea that the principle of legality could not be considered as violated when an exceptional safeguard procedure is implemented in order to restore the primacy of the globe model rules, which again are the basis upon which the domestic legislation will explicitly rely. these are a few arguments, and of course, any observation is welcome at this stage. Sorry not to have been able to activate my video.
Thank you, Daniel, and no problem. Indeed, we could focus on the substance of what you were saying. And so thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us and your analysis of the tax certainty mechanisms in general for the globe rule. I think what we can just say to conclude is that there is more to come, even if a lot of has already been made to provide for tax certainty in relation to the globe rule. So stay tuned, and I give it to you, Akim, I guess, to continue with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of you, and at least Daniel,
it works.
We can see you goodbye. We can see your picture. Thanks a lot for participating. Thank you also to the other panelists, including myself as an Italian, and John. And I think with this and on the dot, Bob will appreciate this. It's FTA. We're keeping to the time. This is tax administration, not policy, so we keep track. So I come to one of my favorite parts, I think, of the Tax Certainty Day. And of course, you know, one of our favorite people in the tax certainty dimension, which is Bob Hamilton, the Commissioner of Canada Revenue and also the chair of the Forum on Tax Administration. Bob, I'm very pleased that you were able to take some time out of your busy agenda to be with us today, not for the first time, to walk us through, to run us through the very important MAP Awards, where I think we show appreciation of so many people in the tax administration for the amazing job they have done under difficult circumstances, COVID and the like. So it's quite an achievement, I think, but without further ado, Bob, I hand the floor over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Kim. Just a quick check. Can people hear and see me okay? We're good? Okay, excellent. Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. And it's truly an honor to be back again, as Kim said, not my first attendance at these awards. I'm very happy to celebrate the successes that we've had in the area of MAP. I think that earlier statistics, I wasn't able to see them, but I know that they point to there's always room for improvement. But I think we also need to acknowledge where we have had some successes and where we're making significant progress. And as the chair of the FTA, I want to take the opportunity to recognize where we have done well. I would just say, by way of preamble, we came off a very successful plenary in Sydney very recently, where I thought a few messages were really important. Obviously, we're all working together on Pillar 1, Pillar 2, taking the administrative thought process and actions necessary, a challenging environment, but one which we are embracing and trying to execute with that precise timing and attention to detail that Kim alluded to. The other thing that was really important was how we've collaborated together as a group. And we saw this through the pandemic, where we had an opportunity to work in what could be challenging situations. But my sense is, if anything, it made us stronger. We had to work through some difficulties, obviously, with that the pandemic gave us, but we really did, I think, come together as a group, and that collaboration, working together, solving problems, I think really shone through. And this is an example of that, and I'm certainly happy to be here to celebrate it with you once again this year. So today we're going to talk about the awards in 5 different categories, which relate to different aspects of the MAP program. And the top jurisdictions in each category have been determined on specific criteria. And just to outline them briefly, I'll talk a little bit more of them as we go through them. But speed, age of inventory, caseload management, cooperation, and improvement. So those are the categories we're going to celebrate today. So with that, let me turn to them. The first one is speed, or the age of average time to close MAP cases. This is the award, as I said, for the best average time for transfer pricing cases for one award and for others in the other award. And let me go to the winners and then I'll talk a little bit about the results. For the best average time for transfer pricing cases, Spain takes the award this year. And for the best average time for other cases, it's Ireland. And I should say, as it relates to all of the awards, you can applaud using either the applaud button or congratulate the winners via the chat function as you wish. But congratulations to Spain and Ireland. And let's take a little bit of a peek behind the results. For transfer pricing cases, we looked at jurisdictions that closed at least 50 cases. And we see that 3 jurisdictions closed their cases on average less than 2 years, less than 24 months. It took Spain 19.6 months, UK 20.9 months, and Germany rounds out the top 3 jurisdictions with an average closing time of 23.1 months. For other cases, we looked at jurisdictions that closed at least 20 cases, and the top 3 consists of Spain at 9 months, Australia at 7.5 months, and Ireland, which closed on average within 5 months. So Spain, congratulations for this achievement on transfer pricing cases. Would you care to share with us what helped you achieve this very impressive average time?
Thanks, Commissioner, and thank you very much to the OECD Secretariat. It's a great honor for me to receive this award on behalf of the Spanish transfer pricing MAP team. And first, I would like to thank the Spanish MAP team for their very hard work. So, enhorabuena, equipo, congratulations, team. And of course, I would also like to thank our treaty partners. Without them, this award would not have been possible. So we would like to share this award with them. And when reflecting about the actions taken that have led us to this award, we would like to highlight the following. First, a good planning of meetings with our treaty partners to discuss cases, scheduling extra meetings if needed, in order to move more complex cases forward. Second, an appropriate follow-up of cases by case handlers with their counterparties in other countries, with taxpayers and with tax advisors. And third, a quick response by taxpayers and tax advisors when competent authorities require them to provide further information or further clarification. So thank you very much and muchísimas gracias por el reconocimiento. Thanks.
Thank you very much for those insights. And it's always helpful to hear from everyone that has had some successes to pass along some of the lessons learned, some of the best practices. And as in all the activities of the FTA, those are very, very important for us to learn from each other as we go forward. In terms of the average time on other cases, Ireland, congratulations on this. And maybe I'll give you the opportunity to share some of the reasons for your success.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Bob. I hope everyone can hear me. I'd like to thank the OECD for this award, and I'm delighted to accept it on behalf of the Irish Competent Authority for other cases. Yes, I think there are a couple of things which resulted in the success in terms of our average times. Over the past couple of years, our MAP inventory has increased significantly, so we placed an even stronger focus on managing that caseload and try to progress our cases as efficiently, effectively, and timely as possible. And this involved, for example, streamlining the way that we worked our MAP cases, taking full advantage of virtual and other electronic channels of communication. And then in turn, that provided many benefits in terms of discussion, progression, and resolution of cases. And also one of the key elements, I think, in helping us achieve the good times that we did this year was the continued fostering of our relationships with our treaty partners and the development of strong, open communication to prioritise and progress our cases to achieve, in most cases, full positive resolution. So I'd like to also thank sincerely our treaty partners and for their cooperation and their willingness to work together to find solutions to resolve our cases. And of course, we look forward to continuing these relationships over the coming months and years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights. And congratulations again to both Spain and Ireland on the speed and average time to close. Let's move to the second category, which is the age of inventory. And this award will go to the jurisdiction with the smallest percentage of pre-2016 cases in its ending inventory. And jurisdictions with more than 100 cases in inventory were taken into consideration. And the winner is, oh my goodness, Canada. So there you go, close to home here. Congratulations to that great country. Anyway, let's take a look at the results again. In the top 5, we start with around 4% of cases left in inventory. Number 3 is Spain, with around 4% of old cases. Number 2 is Ireland, and Canada now has around 2% of old cases in its inventory. Well done, Canada. I'm very proud of the team here. Let's talk a bit about some of the specific efforts that you've put in place to close more of your old cases.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Hamilton, and thank you to the Secretariat for this recognition. I'm Michael Jennings, the Director of Competent Authority Services here at the Canada Revenue Agency. And I would say that our success in this area really stems from 3 factors, mostly our skillful and thriving workforce. Secondly, our agile work environment here at the Canada Revenue Agency. And thirdly, enhancements that we've made to our procedures over the years. In terms of our workforce, we really have been making significant efforts in recruitment, but also investing a lot in training and development to support our workforce. Our agile work environment here at the Canada Revenue Agency also allowed us to capitalize on new technologies and benefit from the virtual work environment during the pandemic, which allowed us to maintain productive working relationships with our treaty partners and advance our aged workload significantly. Also, the virtual work environment led us to rethink how we do business and our procedures, and we were really able to standardize a lot of the best practices that came out of the work of the FTA MAP Forum and from internal best practices as well. So I would like to thank our treaty partners for helping us in our success, and we are greatly honored.
Great, thank you. Thank you for those comments. I think one thing I would draw from that, and this again is something common that we see across the FTA in a number of areas, is trying to take the best of what we learned through the pandemic. As I mentioned before, it threw some challenges onto our lap, but it also showed us that we could do some things differently and better. And as we emerge slowly from the pandemic, it's a real opportunity to make sure that we take back some of the good things that we were doing before, but also take advantage of some of the things we learned how to do a little bit more efficiently and better through the pandemic. And so I think that bodes well for the future for all the countries on a number of areas. So thank you for those comments. Let's move to the next category, which is caseload management. And this award is given to the jurisdiction that best managed its total caseload, which is determined by comparing the number of cases closed with the number of cases that it has to deal with. So there's an award for large MAP jurisdictions with more than 100 cases left in their inventory, and one for jurisdictions with a moderate inventory between 20 and 100 cases. And the winners are, for the large-sized inventory group, Ireland, and for the medium-sized inventory group, New Zealand. Now let's look at those results a little bit more carefully. The calculation here has a couple of dimensions to it. The ratio we're looking at is to compare the cases closed in 2021 with the total caseload during that year, calculated using the starting inventory and the new cases started during the year. For the jurisdictions with a large inventory, we see that the UK with 49 is third. Second is Luxembourg with 63%, and in first place was Ireland with 73%. And for jurisdictions with a medium-sized inventory, South Africa is third with 37%, Norway comes second with 38%, and New Zealand is first with 65%. Ireland, again, my congratulations. You're getting to be a return to the podium. I expect that there may be a link between you winning in this category and the first one. What did the trick for you?
Thank you very much. Yes, we certainly are delighted to accept this award on behalf of Ireland and the work that we do here. It's certainly fantastic to see such a great acknowledgement of the hard work and efforts of our own team and also the teams of our treaty partners. I suppose our success in the resolution of our MAP cases during 2021 with positive outcomes is a combination of a number of factors, many of which my colleague Aisling has already mentioned earlier. And like you said, there certainly is a link in that award and certainly this one too. I think some of the main items contributing to it include increasing our resources in the competent authority function in Ireland, which we have done over the past number of years and seeing the effects of that coming through. We've continued good practices that we developed during 2020 during COVID with respect to using the online platforms for virtual meetings with our treaty partners and with taxpayers, but also combining now with the very welcome resolution of face-to-face meetings and getting the best of combining both together. And then, of course, developing and building on our existing strong relationships with our treaty partners, without which, we wouldn't be winning any awards. So I'd like to thank our own team in Ireland and, of course, our treaty partners for all the hard work, the excellent efforts, and the cooperation in working together to resolve our MAP cases with positive outcomes. And we look forward to continuing to work together to close our MAP cases in an efficient, effective, and timely manner, and maybe win some more awards. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, and congratulations again. New Zealand, why don't you tell us a little bit about your keys to success?
Oh, thanks, Bob. It feels a bit like the MAP Olympics, doesn't it? Yeah, no, we're delighted with the award. I think it reflects three things from our side. Notably, the high priority status we give to MAP cases. Secondly, the hard work of our MAP team. And thirdly, as mentioned by a number of other award winners, the great cooperative spirit of our major treaty partners. And I'll call out both Australia and the UK in that regard. It's a two-way street when it comes to dispute resolution. So thanks again.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, it is a little bit like the Academy Awards. I've opted not to have the Ricky Gervais approach to emceeing the event and throwing cutting remarks at everyone, but it's a great opportunity. And as you say, like it's never you're doing this alone. You're doing it in partnership. You're depending on others to help you. So I think that's a great message for us all as we look through this. So let's move to the next category, which is cooperation, building on that theme. And this category recognizes jurisdictions that work particularly well together and that reach the most number of agreements compared to their total caseload. And that total caseload is calculated using the number of cases in its starting inventory and the cases started during 2021. MAP, as I said, is not something you can do by yourself, with the exception of the cases where you grant unilateral relief, of course. It takes two to tango. So here we have an award for jurisdictions that manage their joint caseload well. And the winners are, for best cooperation in transfer pricing cases, France and the United States. And for the best cooperation in other cases, it's Ireland and the UK. Now let's just take a look at the results a little bit more closely. Here an agreement score was designed that compared the cases fully resolved in 2021 by a pair of jurisdictions as compared to their total MAP caseload, calculated using their starting inventory and the new cases started during that year. I need to clarify that only jurisdictions that had more than 20 joint cases were taken into consideration, and that this only relates to the cases received after January 2016, as we don't have information on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis for the old cases. Now, for transfer pricing cases, Denmark and Germany managed to close a substantial portion of their joint caseload with an agreement fully resolving the taxation at issue, coming in third with an agreement score of 53. Germany and the United States did a little bit better, around 54, coming in second, but France and the United States are the best pair. They managed to close a majority of their joint caseload with an agreement score of 63. For the other cases category, Belgium and Italy did well with an agreement score of 33. Belgium and Luxembourg had an agreement score of close to 40, which is great. However, Ireland and the UK closed almost all joint cases with an agreement score of 103. So let's turn to the recipients, France and the United States first. Congratulations. And France, first, could you share what you think contributed to the good cooperation on this front? I'm not sure if France is jumping in. Perhaps while we're waiting, I could see if the US has any thoughts. Oh, somebody coming in?
Well, this is the United States. I would like to say thank you for this recognition. We're very honored to see our cooperation with a cooperative and resolution-minded treaty partner like France be acknowledged. And certainly in 2021, we had this tremendous success, but it was the culmination of deliberate efforts over the preceding years as well, to work together, to analyze the inventory, ensure we were planning our meetings efficiently and doing the prompt follow-ups that are needed in paperwork to bring tentative resolutions to fruition with full mutual agreements. This required hard work by our staff and by our treaty partner, France, and I want to congratulate them all on this award.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Let me open the door. Do we have someone from France who would like to comment on their reasons for success?
Hello, can you hear us?
Hello. Oui. Oui.
Great. Hello, everyone. To take this award on behalf of the French Competent Authority. I'm Stéphanie Prudent, Deputy Director for International Affairs, and I'm here with Guillaume Ressouche, who managed. So, Frank, non, ça, il faut ne pas. A large inventory, but this award proves that good cooperation between competent authorities enables us to close cases and to be as efficient as possible. Frequent meetings, long-term relationships with between case holders, and to go out of our way to meet each other's needs. So I'd like to thank our American treaty partner, John and Jessica, who since left, and of course Judith and Rachel. And I'd like to give a big round of applause to Arnaud Sage, who left the French Competent Authority a few weeks ago, and to Guillaume, who has been strongly and regularly committed to this relationship.
Perfect. Thank you very much. A bit choppy there at the beginning, but we got the gist of it and most of it, and much better at the end. So congratulations again. And maybe let's turn to the other cases with the UK and Ireland. And maybe I'll go to the UK first. Very impressive. How did you manage this success?
Hi, thank you for this award. I think the award recognises the work of both the UK and Ireland by working together in a collaborative manner to resolve these tricky issues, particularly with regard to the Article 4 company residence cases, where certainty is key for business. I think Aisling has hinted earlier in her acceptance of the close cooperation between jurisdictions. And I think that has been shown remarkably well between the UK and Ireland in settling these cases. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and congratulations. Ireland, well, maybe we'll turn to you, and you're having quite a good day. And was there anything that you would like to add to this category?
Yes, thank you very much. And as you said, yes, we're delighted to have received all of these awards today. And it's a product of a lot of work in our own teams, but also the collaboration and cooperation of our treaty partners. But just to reiterate what David has said, we've always enjoyed a close collaborative and cooperative relationship with the UK Competent Authority in terms of our other cases. So we're very happy that this award recognises that cooperation and has resulted in the resolution of a large number of cases with the UK in 2021. So I would like to thank David and his team in the UK for all of the work that was done to manage the caseload in terms of prioritising, discussing and resolving cases as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And that ultimately then ensured taxpayer certainty in the application of our treaty. So I think things, again, like frequent communication, using both written and virtual channels, and then just a strong focus on productivity, progression and resolution has resulted in the results that we achieved for 2021. So once again, thank you to our treaty partner and to the OECD for this recognition.
Thank you, and congratulations once again, tremendous achievement. With that, we'll turn to the final category, which is the most improved jurisdiction. And so this award goes to the jurisdiction that showed the highest increase in the number of cases resolved with full agreement or unilateral relief in 2021 compared to 2020. And it goes to the jurisdiction that has had an increase in both categories of cases. And the winner is Germany. And now let's understand the results just a bit better. Germany showed the most improvement with 144 more cases resolved as compared to 2020. This includes an improvement of 90 more for transfer pricing cases and an improvement of 54 more for other cases. Germany, congratulations on your success in this category. Could you share with us what contributed to the great improvement that you had in your MAP performance?
Thank you so much. And first, I would like to say one word, which is finally. I'm thrilled to accept this MAP award for Germany. And there has been continued efforts by Germany to improve and build the resources needed to work MAP cases. And Germany is well aware that it has a great responsibility because of its great caseload. During the pandemic, a lot of work and time and efforts were invested by our MAP teams to keep the German CA going, and we were able to do telephone conference calls as much as possible and allowed our colleagues to work as flexible times and hours as possible from their home. The continued dedication of our team to the MAP process, despite so many difficulties, is mirrored in this outcome, but also the dedication and continued efforts of our peers to work with us and their willingness to bridge gaps with us. And that has contributed to this result, despite the challenging times we all had to face. And this is very much appreciated by the German CA, and the award is also a credit to our peers. We were and are in this together, and the German CA very much cherishes the many good working relationships with its peers that we have built and which have carried us through the past year. In the past year, it sometimes felt as if we were never getting away from the computer or out of online meetings. And maybe that is also a reason why we did get a lot of work done, but there is still a lot left to do for us. And the German CA also strongly believes in the importance of building relationships and solving cases through face-to-face meetings, and is looking forward to meeting many of you, of our peers again next year. Together, I think we can have a successful year 2023 and achieve so much dealing with each other in the spirit of fairness and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations again on being the most improved jurisdiction. So that takes us to the end of the awards, the five categories, and I just had a couple of concluding remarks. It fits very well, as I've said, with the agenda and the goals of the Forum of Tax Administrators. Certainly, the issue of bringing business tax certainty and working in a timely way, working to erode the backlogs that we may have, how we work together, how we manage our caseload. Those are all very, very important aspects in a mission that we have at the FTA to provide greater tax certainty. And it's something that's going to get more important rather than less important as we move forward. So I think it's important for us to celebrate the successes we have an opportunity to talk to each other about some things that are going well, some things that aren't, because we're going to need to be collectively pursuing this agenda in a very efficient and rigorous manner as we go forward. So a big thank you to all the jurisdictions involved, certainly to those jurisdictions that received awards this year. Big congratulations to you, but really to everyone who's worked together to try to make progress on this file. And for those who didn't get an award this year, maybe you'll be up on the podium next year at this self-styled Academy Awards for MAP performance. But I do see MAP as being quite important as we move forward with the changes in the global tax framework. I would just want to also thank the OECD Secretariat for not only putting on this session to give us an opportunity to talk to each other, collaborate, and celebrate, but also in coming up with, the categories, and people have to look at these and they have to decide, how we're going to deliver these awards. And I think you've done, again, an excellent job. And so, Akim, to you and all the team, thank you. And I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being with us. I think we're coming to the end here, and we're still on time, 4:50, so just on target. I think we will close on time. You all have day jobs. We pointed this out already. So just a couple of words from me, and then the last word will go to Alan, who I also see already here. I think I can just echo what Bob's just said. This is tremendously important, and this day allows us all to sort of showcase what's happening, because there's a lot of things happening, even if we don't every day report on them, but these are the everyday changes that bring you everyday results, and they are so important. And so I think, as I said, this has been a pillar zero, as Alan calls it, for a long time, and it will continue to be a pillar of the work of the OECD. You can see that the FTA, the chair here present, are not taking their eyes off the ball on the tax certainty dimension, and neither does the Secretariat throughout all this time. And in fact, I think we are powering in part some of the developments that you see in Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, how insufficient they might still be and how much incremental progress they further need. But you see the continuing line of the tax certainty dimension in many, many things that we do. And I think, as you said, Ellen, before, that is important for resource allocation, for risk control, for resourcing to risk. But it also has an important dimension beyond our tax administration, the tax space, to facilitate cross-border investment and keep it going, to look into a prosperous future. And it does make a contribution, and an important contribution to that, and we're very conscious of that. That is all I wanted to say. Thank very much, all of those that are listening, all of those that are doing all the good work. And that I hand it over to you, Ellen, to close.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much, Akim, and thanks to everyone for making today possible. I think it is important that we come together on an annual basis, at least, just to recognise the incredible work that's been done in this area. It is important, as I said at the outset. It's tax certainty is one of the most critical aspects of this agenda for business, and I think we've learned today, or heard today, the many different ways in which people are not only working on tax certainty, but working to improve all of the processes that are associated with it. So so thanks to everyone for making it happen, and thanks for a really lively and well-informed discussion. I think we also were reminded today just of the importance of a few things, of innovation in the way that we approach this. Cooperation, that came up time and time again throughout the afternoon, but afternoon for me. But also there in the comments we heard about what had been the key features of enabling some of that outstanding performance that was recognised in the awards, together with transparency and trust. And I think the more we can come together to review where we stand on some of the core approaches and instruments that we've known for some time. Great to see that APAs and maps, that those things are working well, not only working well, but that people continue to invest in thinking about how to continuously improve their operation and on a day-to-day basis, and making that happen. That's great. Also really good to hear the example of the more transformational approach that is encompassed in ICAP. And I hope that we'll continue to reap the rewards of that enormous investment, I think, that was made by the FTA in pulling that together, in doing the pilots and working through some of the challenges. So I really wish that great success for the future. Reflecting on some of our more mainstream tax certainty sort of instruments, if I can call it that, I think takes us into thinking about Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and the importance of ensuring that we take the learnings from how things are working today, and that we apply those learnings into the new challenges like the two-pillar package. I think from business perspective, as you heard from Karen earlier, Pillars 1 and 2 are immensely complex new tax systems that we're going to have to comply with. And of course, tax administrators are going to have to learn to monitor those as well and to ensure compliance with them. Enormous investment will be required from all of us in core systems. But I think it's fair to say that in that interim period, until we sort of learn to live within the new systems, there will be an increase in uncertainty for taxpayers and tax administrators alike. No doubt over time, I think, Achim, the point you make, that we will get to know them. Everything is complex till you get used to it, and I'm sure we will. But that knowledge that with familiarity will reduce uncertainty, I don't think should dent our determination to build the best tax certainty mechanisms into the design of the rules and their implementation as we possibly can. We have a relatively short window to do that, and I really would encourage everyone. I've heard great enthusiasm about working together. I really encourage us all to work on getting this right by design, the same way that we work hard and cooperate on the rest of the tax certainty agenda, learning from what we've seen working elsewhere, but also continuing to focus on some of these innovative approaches which are peculiar to Pillars 1 and Pillar 2. And who knows, maybe next year we'll be awarding a prize for the teams that are working on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 tax certainty processes this time next year. With that, congratulations to all the winners. It was really great to hear about the innovative use of technology, the way that cooperation was an important part, but also recognizing that a lot of this is just down to hard work. And for that, we thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for participating. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.